Good evening, everyone. Tonight's Tuesday, November 19th, 2019, and regular meeting of the Beverly Planning Board is called to order. Just advisory that BevCam is filming tonight, so everybody should be on their best behavior. I would welcome a motion to recess for public hearings, please. Motion by Ms. Flannery, seconded by Mr. Miller. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. We are now in public hearing. Our first public hearing is the continued public hearing, site plan review number 140-19, special permit -172-19, an inclusionary housing permit number 117-19, Depot 2, a mixed commercial and residential building containing 111 residential units with associated parking and site improvements. The applicant is Depot Square Phase 2 LLC.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. All right. Good evening, members of the board. Miranda Gooding from Glovsky & Glovsky on behalf of the applicant, along with the rest of the members of the project team, Chris Copeland, principal at Beverly Crossing, Dad Masco from SV Design, Rebecca Brown from Greenman Peterson, and Doug Halpert, also from Greenman Peterson, are traffic consultants for this project. As members of the board and the public are now aware, Beverly Crossing's principals have announced that they propose saving the Casa de Luca building at 146-148 Rantoul Street and incorporating it into the design of the current... Sorry, is that better? Yes. All right. I'll just repeat. I think members of the board and the public are aware that Beverly Crossing's principals have announced that they propose to save the Casa de Luca building located on the corner of the project at 146-148 Rantoul Street, and to incorporate it into the design of the currently pending mixed-use development that is before the board. This evening, we plan to share some conceptual drawings of what this change would look like and how the building would be connected to the existing proposed building. At the outset, in order to avoid any misunderstanding on the part of the board or the public, we would like to emphasize that these drawings are conceptual only, and they are still subject to a fair amount of revision and refinement. For example, we have not developed every window or materials detail, and we have not fully proven out the floor plan changes and other items that might affect the bedroom count or even the bedroom mix. We think that the magnitude of unit change is something like 106 units compared to the 111 that were previously before the board. And we think that the parking garage will be modified. It will remain underground as two stories of parking, and will also yield the required one space per unit ratio. Right now, we're guessing 106 units. What we've really focused on before coming before you this evening is this. What does it look like if Beverly Crossing renovates the Casa building in place and connects it to the rest of the project? We think we've made good progress on that conceptual plan, and Thad will share that shortly. We do anticipate that formal plans will be submitted after this meeting in time for the December DRB meetings and the planning board meeting, in accordance with those boards' regularly scheduled published deadlines. This evening, following Thad's brief presentation, we intend to proceed with the parking and traffic presentation for the project overall. Again, keeping in mind that the change that we're proposing here is not that radical in terms of the reduction in unit count, so the findings of the parking analysis that have been previously submitted, we think pertain as well to the new project if a little bit conservative. And also, as a reminder, the Parking and Traffic Commission already completed its extensive review of the project over 3 separate meetings and issued a detailed recommendation with conditions, all of which the applicant agrees are acceptable. So Rebecca Brown from Greenman Peterson will be giving you the overview of her study and the P&T findings, including providing an updated plan that incorporates the expanded list of pedestrian improvements recommended by the Parking and Traffic Commission. Before we get started with all that, however, Chris Copeland wishes to say a few words about the decision to propose renovating the Casa building.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I know we have a busy night, and we've kind of made a big change here. So we realize the Casa incorporation here at this juncture comes pretty late in the approvals process. I just want folks to know that there was really no broad scheme of anything. There was no gaming of any system. There was no playing of politics out. We really felt we needed to make the right decision at the right time, at a critical time. This has been a very difficult process. It's a critical piece of real estate. It's an emerging neighborhood. It's part of a debate that runs on all sides of factual, emotional, anecdotal, local, regional. There's a lot at play here and a lot at stake. Preservation as well. We just want to get it right. We don't want this parcel to remain dormant. I don't think anyone here does. We've listened to intense public and private feedback for about a year now, obviously in prior years too, with voices for and against growing louder since this summer. We believe most people will be in favor of keeping this building. We hope so, driven by both the desire to reduce the scale of the overall project and its impact to the park in particular, and also maintaining a contributing building to a National Registered Historic District to help preserve the integrity of the district that we help create. But I don't want it to be lost that Steve, prior to his passing in January, he did set our compass on that prior design. That's an important fact. I don't want it to be overlooked. We took that charge with all we had. That was the charge of the team. That was my charge. It's what we took seriously. Now without him, with the distilled voices over the past several months in particular, we've spent the last several weeks, I've been with the estate, the family, asking ourselves, what would he have done from here? What would he have done at this point? But also, what should we do for him? What's in the best interest of Beverly, but what should we do for him now that he's not here? So his estate, his family believes deep down the answers to those questions could and should be one and the same. We think he would have offered this alternative path at this juncture. And by honoring him through the public sentiment, a tasteful incorporation of a significant piece of cherished history. We hope this means we can all come together, move forward with this block that desperately, I think we agree, needs a breath of new life. It's been long enough. I know our esteemed architect has told you, Thad has told you, that we can't reuse these buildings. I know what he said. That was the mission that we were set on again. What that means for him now, as Miranda outlined, is an enormous challenge of building code, logistics, dimensional constraints, shoring, parking, technical interpretation. But his charge mainly is a design we can all learn to love and come to appreciate. What this means for us as a developer is a considerable incremental investment, something more than $2 million. I've used that number before. That's a real number. It poses a real barrier to financing this project and attracting investors, which we have to do. The only reason we're able to do this now is Steve's family's decided that the cost premium can be considered in his name to help restore project viability. He was a visionary, he's a philanthropist, he loved this city, and he was that before being a developer. And I've personally seen him put passion before profit on many projects. I've seen that, I've witnessed it for years. Putting people before himself time and time again, I've witnessed that. The preliminary design that you're about to see tonight is not perfect, but it's offered in that spirit, and we hope to refine it as quick as we can after receiving input from tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thad Samasco, SV Design. Krista Broyles is here as well to fill in the information that I may not remember. As Miranda mentioned, and Chris have mentioned, we were given this charge about a week ago to see how we can fit this in. This is schematic, but I think at the top level, we think we can make it work, and I'll show you what we're generally thinking now tonight. Or maybe I won't. So the general idea is, first of all, to keep most of what we had in terms of the C-shaped building, but one leg of the C would feature the Casa de Luca building. Thank you. That's probably what it was. We would leave the building in place on that corner in the same position it is now. We would remove that one-story sort of wart that's off the back that used to be the old kitchen, and so we could maintain our courtyard that you see here. Typically, a strategy on preserving a building and putting a new one next to it is to sort of separate it and link, where you have the historic building and then there's some other kind of connector piece. Often it's kind of transparent and glass, and that's kind of what we're thinking. And then you have the rest of your building, which I'll show you in a minute. Proven strategy. It helps us. We have some significant code hurdles to overcome, including a 3-hour fire. 8-inch concrete block firewall running up the entire length of the building that needs to be structurally freestanding and so forth and so on. So we're working our way through that. But what you see here is, again, the Casa building on the corner, and then this connector could be a very interesting space to be determined. It can be as simple as a gallery that you walk through from Rantoul Street to the courtyard. And as you walk through it on the left could be a big open glass wall that could open up to kind of like if you're at an airport and you see a Starbucks, it's open right into the corridor. Tables can spill out into that space. It could actually be part of a retailer who takes over that whole space. But in any event, we see that space is probably its full use might be determined by who the tenants are. But ultimately, we see it as a way to connect Rantoul Street potentially to the courtyard in an active pedestrian way, at least some of the hours. We are incorporating a ramp right in the back of Casa so that you can get up to the courtyard, handicap accessible ramp, so that courtyard can operate independently from this connector piece. So that's the general look and feel. So the building is back on the corner and connected by a transparent feeling connector to but it's basically mostly the rest of the design. As you know, the Casa building is 3 stories. So this is what it would look like from Rantoul Street. I may be mistaken, but I remember when I came to Beverly in the mid-'80s, it was called Park Place Restaurant, and it was painted a very nice, soft willow green, and it was very attractive. It was tone on tone. Seems like that might be a good color choice here. It's not just as a thought. And then immediately to the left of it would be this 3-story connection piece that would have that walk-through corridor I mentioned. And then the rest of our project would have a taller 5-story masonry building with this cast stone cap that was reflective of some of the post office architecture, more of a classic, with the architrave and colonnade. And then the remaining building to the left has a little bit of the mill feel to it as it starts to work its way down toward the gateway and the other buildings down that end of Rantoul Street. A setback, the 5 feet would be another kind of connector between the 5-story building and the 4-story building, and then setback another 5 feet would be the 6th floor, which will be reduced in size. Likely, 6th floor area will be taken even further away from the post office, so that it kind of lines up now with if you will, the left side of that 5-story piece. So while this is a true elevation, you need to be quite far away to see the 6th floor. We plan on, in coming presentations, to show you how the 6th floor is very hard to see it from any nearer the building, and you must be some distance away where its impact would not be felt so strongly. The Casa building itself, we're imagining, renovating and keeping the general look and feel of the window openings and so forth. just for scale purposes, to the left here on this drawing is the Depot Square condominium. You can see how our height lines up, and that taller line you see in the very top is the height of the Holmes building, which, as you know, is further down to the left of the block. So we will also show you the scheme that's further on in our next presentation. You'll see how this building height scale-wise fits in pretty nicely with that row of buildings, but then steps down to the 3 stories as it hits the park. This is the view from Railroad Avenue. If you, as you probably know, the Casa building now on that side going down Railroad Avenue is just a series of punched windows that are kind of high and sort of inaccessible. Our notion is to open that up and have it be much more of a storefront, more engaging. As you see here, there's room for a planter bed in front of it and maybe some benches as well. So that's that piece that you see there. And then behind it is the 5-story building, which will, again, you need to be a good distance away to actually feel that height, but it will be a good way to frame the Casa building. And then, as I mentioned, the rest of the design remained unchanged. And on the far left here, I'm showing the 131 building, which is also a 5-story building, you know, directly across the street. Give you a sense of the scale of the two together. I guess I skipped, but this is a historic photo of what the Casa building looked like when it was a hotel. I think at this point it was called the Park Hotel. The balustrade is obviously now gone. The cornice is left. Not much more is left, but the expectation is that the feel of this can be restored. I wouldn't call it a direct historic restoration. For example, along the Railroad Avenue side, as I mentioned, we're going to open that up more. But generally speaking, the look and feel and the scale of the building will remain more like what you see in this photograph. I think you can see here that I don't see that 1-story lump is not on the back of this building. The one I mentioned would be taken off. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Good evening. I am Rebecca Brown from Greenman Peterson. I'm going to, oh, maybe I'm not. Apparently you have to be closer. Okay. It's just a little on delay. So I'm going to walk you through the traffic study that we prepared for the project and talk about some improvements that are proposed that we have developed in conjunction with the Parking and Traffic Commission for the project. So here's a diagram here showing you what the study area was for the traffic study that was completed. To kind of orient you a little bit, this is Rantoul Street running along here, River Street along the backside here, Pleasant Street crossing over. Right here is the Beverly Depot train station and Railroad Avenue. So the study area that we looked at included the intersections of Rantoul Street with Pleasant Street, Railroad Avenue, and Federal Street as well. And then also the intersections of Pleasant Street at Park Street at Railroad, River at Pleasant Street, and then way up here also Federal Street at McPherson Drive and River Street as well. So the first part of our traffic study really included looking at, looking at the safety of all of these study area intersections. So this diagram here is kind of showing you, we looked at Mass DOT crash records over a 5-year period from 2012 to 2016, which was the most recent 5 years that were available at the time. Looking at the number of crashes that occurred at each of the study area intersections, and then also comparing those to the statewide average crash rates in terms of the number of crashes at the intersection per million entering vehicles. So the numbers shown in each of the dots represents the number of crashes that happened at each of these intersections over the 5-year study period, and the color of those dots represents whether or not it was above the statewide average for the crash rate. So you can see here that there's 2 intersections really that were above the statewide crash rate average, and the first one up here is the intersection of Federal Street at McPherson Drive. That intersection experienced 23 crashes, which was an average of just under 5 crashes per year over that time period, and a crash rate that was slightly higher than the statewide average. The majority of the crashes at that intersection are angle collisions, which is not typical of an unsignalized intersection like this. One of the contributing factors to crashes at that location is that as you approach the intersection on River Street from the south headed north to the intersection, there is a crosswalk at that intersection that causes the stop line to be set back considerably far from the intersection. So when cars approach, some of them are stopping at the stop bar, some of them are advancing up to the curb line, and drivers on the other approaches are unsure when the vehicle is actually going to enter the roadway. So the majority of the crashes at that intersection involved a driver coming from River Street northbound and a vehicle on one of the other approaches. So one of the things that we had recommended at that intersection was looking at relocating the stop line closer to the intersection so that people are stopping right at the edge of the curb. They can see a little bit better because there is some grade issues there. They'll be able to see a little bit better in each direction. And that improvement might actually help with some of the capacity issues at that intersection too, because where people are right now stopping further back, they're kind of stopping twice as they go through that intersection. They're stopping at the stop line, rolling up a little bit more, and then stopping again. The other intersection was the intersection here at Park Street and Pleasant Street, where that one, again, was higher than the statewide average. The majority of the crashes at that location were actually happening in inclement weather conditions, and 3 of those involved trucks that hit the MBTA overpass there. So are really not quite related to the geometry of the intersection so much as the clearance underneath the bridge. But certainly some improved signage at that location, warning of the low clearance on that bridge, and directing trucks, if they do come down that way, to take the right-hand turn. If they are too tall, could certainly help at that location as well. All of the other study area intersections were less than the statewide average, less than 3 crashes per year on average, and no real issues. Oh, it actually worked. So the next piece of the traffic study was really projecting how many trips the project would generate. And the first piece of that really involved looking at what the existing traffic is throughout the study area. So we collected traffic counts back in March during the weekday morning and evening peak hours, as well as during the Saturday midday peak hours. And we grew those traffic volumes out to a 7-year projection by growing those traffic volumes up to account for the seasonal variation, as well as growing them by 0.5% per year out to a 2026 condition. That growth rate was based on historic traffic patterns in the surrounding area that actually showed traffic volumes are growing at a rate of about 0.2% per year. But we used a more conservative estimate using the 0.5% per year. We also included traffic that would be generated by other development projects in the surrounding area as well. One of those being the 211 Rantoul Street project that was under construction actually at the time that the counts were done. So the next piece was then looking at how much traffic would our project generate. So to do this, we estimated the site-generated trips based on Institute of Transportation Engineers, or ITE, data for a multifamily housing unit, as well as a high turnover sit-down restaurant. So for the retail space on the first floor, we assumed that all of that space would be occupied by a restaurant use because that type of use has the highest number of trips per square footage in terms of retail versus a restaurant use. So we assumed that it would all be a restaurant to provide the most conservative or worst case estimate of the traffic that would be generated by the site. There's also a certain component of the trips on the site that would be shared with between the two uses. That would be residents that would be eating in the restaurants or shopping in the retail that may be there. Based on ITE data, roughly 11 to 15% of the trips generated by the facility would be shared between the different uses on the site. So this column here is kind of showing you what that looks like in terms of how many additional vehicle trips would be generated out on the surrounding roadways. And just to explain, a vehicle trip is either one vehicle entering or one vehicle exiting the facility. So when we talk about trips, that's not cars coming in and out, that's either one vehicle entering or one exiting. The other component was also transit trips. So this site is obviously located in close proximity to the Beverly Depot station that has commuter rail service. It's also located right on Rantoul Street where there is bus service that is also provided. And it is intended to be marketed as a transit-oriented development. So we expect that a high number of the trips generated by the facility will actually be from transit trips. So what we had assumed was a 25% transit percentage in terms of the residential trips generated by the site, and 5% of the retail restaurant trips would be transit trips. And that information came both from the ITE Trip Generation Handbook, as well as some information that was published by MBTA on surrounding area transit use. This data was actually verified using a resident survey of the 131 Rantoul Street project right across the street, which actually showed a higher transit trip percentage than what we were actually estimating here, where about 28 to 32% of the people, depending on the time periods, were using transit or walking and biking to the site as well.
Thank you, Mr. Pass-by.
Yep, yeah, or anything. So then the last component of it was the pass-by trips. So in terms of the residential trips, those were all assumed to be new to the area. But for the restaurant trips, a certain percentage of those would be pass-by trips, and that's people who are already on the roadway, headed to another destination that would stop into the site. That could be someone stopping in to grab a bite to eat on their way home from work, for example. So restaurants of this nature typically generate about 43% pass-by trips. So that's what we have assumed here. So what that results in this last column here shows the net new trips that would be generated by the site. So in the weekday evening and morning peak periods, it's about 62 to 69 new trips. So that's roughly 35 vehicles coming in and out. And then during the Saturday midday time period is 75 new vehicle trips. So with that, we are proposing a pretty robust transportation demand management plan that will help to reduce those vehicle trips as well. Just to kind of run through some of the things that were talked about in conjunction with the Parking and Traffic Commission. Obviously, the site, as I mentioned, is located in a downtown business district. It's right across from the MBTA station. There are bus services that are provided. There's also a very strong walking and bicycling network as well, particularly with the improvements that were just done up and down Rantoul Street. We are proposing significant sidewalk reconstruction in the area and some additional pedestrian improvements that I'll show you in a little bit. We are also planning to offer financial incentives for transit use, including paying for the first month's commuter rail pass for new residents moving in, providing information on bus routes and maps to residents when they move in, and having that information posted in the lobby as well. Providing bicycle storage rooms that would be secured within the parking garage, and also bicycle racks outside for those coming to visit the retail as well. And then we've also proposed to reserve an area where a bike rack could be placed if and when the city of Beverly or the surrounding region develop a region-wide bike share program, similar to what there is now in the Boston area. With that, there will also be a bike repair station that will be provided on the site. And they're looking into as well a bike share program for the residents as well. So right now there is one that is proposed at the 211 Rantoul Street project as sort of a pilot program. And if they find that that one has success, they will implement that here and use that as a gauge to determine how many bicycles should be provided as well. Some of the other components that aren't necessarily trip reducing, but do help is the EV charging stations, the electrical vehicle charging stations that would be provided in the garage. There is planned to be 2 provided upon opening, but having additional availability for more spaces to be added in the future, and also ensuring that the accessible parking spaces can have EV stations as well. So this diagram is just kind of showing how the trips get distributed to the adjacent roadway network. So to estimate how the trips would get distributed, for the residential component, we looked at a U.S. Census journey to work model, looking at people who live in Beverly, where they actually would be commuting to for work. And then for the retail component, we looked at sort of a gravity model of residents living in the surrounding area within a 10-mile radius of the site, and where the population centers are and how those people would be getting to and from the site. So this is just kind of showing the percentages of people that would be coming in and out of the site. So this one here is showing you for each of the peak hours what that results to in terms of the number of trips that would be coming from each of these areas. So looking out at Bridge Street, there's roughly 14 to 18 new vehicle trips that would be headed out Bridge Street. Headed up Rantoul Street to the north is 17 to 21 new vehicle trips. Up McPherson Drive is 8 to 9 new vehicle trips, and then down Rantoul Street to the south is 23 to 28 new vehicle trips, depending on the peak hours. So the next component was looking at the levels of service of each of these study area intersections, both with and without the traffic that's generated by the site. So when you're looking at this diagram, each of these color-coded circles is kind of broken into pie pieces here. So the one in the upper left-hand corner represents the existing level of service of the intersection. The one in the upper right-hand corner is our no-build condition. So that's under 2026 conditions without the traffic generated by the site. And then the bottom one represents the 2026 condition with the traffic that would be generated by our site. So this diagram here is showing you the weekday AM peak hour. And although there is one intersection that I'll talk about in just a minute, the McPherson Drive intersection here, that is at level of service F in the existing condition and obviously would continue to operate that way. The majority of the intersections you can see, there's no real change in the level of service as a result of the development, and I'll just kind of, if you want to advance to the next one. So this one's showing the weekday PM peak hour, and again, you can see when you compare the no build condition here to the build condition, all of those remain the same. So there's no drops in levels of service that occur as a result. And if you want to just show the Saturday one real quick.
Does this correspond to the data in your report on page 32?
It does, yes.
Well,
So this is, yes, this is showing what's in the report.
Okay, but I have trouble matching up what you're showing on the screen and what's in the report. The grades don't match. Unless I'm missing something. We can come back to it.
Sure. Yep, so for the signalized intersections, what you're seeing here represents the overall intersection level of service. That would be at Federal Street and Rantoul Street, which is signalized, and then at Rantoul Street and Railroad Avenue. At the unsignalized intersections, which would be all the other locations, what you're seeing is the worst level of service on any of the approaches.
Okay, take the,
Yep.
unless you want to keep going and come back to this later, it's up to you.
Yep, so like here at,
Take the intersection of Rantoul and Federal at weekday AM. So at weekday AM, you show existing as
a level of service D.
D,
Yep.
but 2026 no build, it goes to an E, and you have it as a D there.
Yep, so there was actually a supplemental that was put out, so it's a response to comments that we received from the Parking and Traffic Commission
So it doesn't
that you
match
should
the
have,
data.
and that's what these should directly match, is that response to
That's why I asked
comments.
you whether it matches the data in your report. Now you're saying it doesn't.
Yeah, so there was a supplemental that was issued that is a response
Do you
to
have that
parking and traffic.
report?
Yep, the board should have that information.
How did the figures change based on what the parking and traffic commission does?
Yeah, so there were some pretty minor changes actually to the analysis that resulted, but it really came from looking at the survey that was done, the resident survey, and what information that showed in terms of the number of transit trips that would be generated by the facility. That was the main difference that resulted in some of the changes.
So based on your meeting with the Parking and Traffic Commission, you decided to give yourself more favorable assumptions about use of transit as opposed to use of the street. I don't understand how that comes from parking
Yeah,
and
so
traffic.
we used more consistent results than what was actually shown in the original study to what was being experienced at the study area intersections. Yep. We also.
If anybody has that report, I'd be happy to see it.
So I might just address the board. I know that the supplement was submitted to parking and traffic. I don't have it with me, so I don't recall whether it made its way to the board, and if not, that responsibility that will be, I apologize, and we'll just digitally to you.
Well, I mean, my questions for tonight are based on the report that I have, so I guess we're gonna have to have another meeting on parking and traffic.
Yeah, the results are not all that different.
I just
They're
wanted to wonder
very,
what
very
they are.
similar. So Doug's gonna grab that information, but we can show that to you anyway. But in general, just kind of walking through the intersections and looking at what the impact is at each of the study area intersections. I did mention that in general, the levels of service don't really change much from going from the no build condition to the build condition. The only two locations where there really is much change is the two intersections of Federal Street at McPherson Drive and at Rantoul Street there, where there are levels of service F that are occurring at those locations. At the McPherson Drive intersection, as I mentioned, that one is at a level of service F today. Obviously, in the 2026 condition, we anticipate that it still will be. We are expecting to add very little traffic to that intersection. If you remember the diagram that I showed a minute ago, showed 8 to 9 new vehicle trips in any of the peak hours. We expect as a result of those going through that we would be increasing delay through that intersection by no more than 8 seconds per vehicle on any of the approaches, and increasing the queues by 1 vehicle on any of those approaches as well. At the intersection of Rantoul Street and Federal Street here, in the PM peak hour, the northbound approach experiences a level of service F, and this one right now is showing AM level of service, but in the PM peak hour, there is a level of service F on that northbound approach. At the time that the study was done, that intersection had not yet been closed out from the Mass DOT project up and down Rantoul Street. So there are still some timing refinements that are being done at that intersection as part of that signal work. So we had recommended some changes that get incorporated into that signal timing to add a little bit more green time on the Rantoul Street northbound approach to help that weekday PM peak hour. At all of the other study area intersections, we're not increasing the delay by more than 3 seconds per vehicle or increasing the queues by more than 1 vehicle. If you can advance the slides. Yeah, it's like 2 forward. Yeah, so this one here is just showing you what the queues look like at each of the study area intersections during each of the time periods. And you can see there's like these double lines that are shown in orange, and then the middle has a solid red line. The solid lines represent the build condition, and the double lines represent the no build condition. As you kind of look around, you can see that for the most part, those lines are right on top of each other. The only noticeable change is right here at McPherson Drive, where you see a slight increase in the queue, and that's really a 1 vehicle increase in the queue there on that approach. For all the other ones, the queues are pretty much the same from no build to build conditions. One more. Okay. Thank you. So as I mentioned that there are considerable pedestrian improvements that are being proposed as part of the project. These were developed, as we mentioned, through our meetings with Parking and Traffic Commission, where we had discussed what could we potentially do to really improve the accessibility to the site, improve the access to the transit station, to encourage people to actually use it, and improve the walking and biking experience in general in this area. So one of the things that we looked at was reconstructing some of the sidewalks in the surrounding area to make them ADA accessible, improving the pedestrian crossings. Right now on Park Street here, I apologize, it looks like it's labeled Rantoul Street, but this is Park Street here. It's kind of a wide open sea of pavement. There's not much there for markings other than the center line on the roadway. So what we're looking to do is add the lane markings on each side of the roadway to narrow those lanes up to 11-foot lanes, or the appearance of 11-foot lanes, provide marked out parking lanes where there is parking available on the sides of the streets, reconstruct those sidewalks all the way around, and construct bump outs here at the intersection of Park Street with Railroad Avenue to reduce those pedestrian crossing distances, to improve the accessibility for pedestrians, and to slow vehicles down as they're coming down Park Street and making that left-hand turn onto Railroad Avenue as well, just to make that a little bit safer for pedestrians as well. And then providing a dedicated crosswalk here over to the MBTA station that would be directly aligned with the track crossing here, to improve that desired line for pedestrians that would be walking up to the depot as well, and providing a bump out as well at this location so that pedestrians have a safe place to stand where they can see oncoming traffic and they can be visible to cars as they're coming along the roadway. And then also providing a new crosswalk in this location here at the intersection of Park Street and Railroad Avenue as well, to bring people across and over to the depot station as well. Right now, as you cross the road in this area, you just kind of get dumped into a parking lot with some, I think it's a dumpster that's located in that area. So actually formalizing nice sidewalk that would be 10 feet wide, leading you into the depot station. Right now, along Pleasant Street here, there's only sidewalk on the site side of the roadway. So we would be looking to add sidewalk along the opposite side of the roadway, and then carry that all the way down with new sidewalk connections all the way out to River Street, and provide an upgraded crossing at River Street with ADA accessible ramps all the way around in these crosswalks as well. With that, we'd also be reconstructing the sidewalk on the northerly side of Pleasant Street as well, coming down to River Street.
I don't see any bike parkings and bike lanes.
Yeah, so the bikes are a little bit hard to see on this figure, but you can see like right here and here, what we've proposed is sharrow pavement markings to indicate that that lane should be shared between bicyclists and pedestrians. An option that we could do on Pleasant Street, or excuse me, on Park Street in this area would be to provide a dedicated bicycle lane in a northbound direction, because there is no parking that's provided in this area. So you could provide a short dedicated bike lane in that area. But in meeting with the Parking and Traffic Commission, there was a desire to really narrow the roadway up and provide some more traffic calming, as opposed to keeping it wider and having those dedicated bicycle lanes. So what we've shown here is the sharrow pavement markings up and down Park Street. And also on Railroad Avenue, there are some sharrows right here and here, and then there's another one right here before you get down to the intersection. Similarly, out on Pleasant Street, there is one located right here, and then there's another one right here for headed in this direction for the sharrows. Pleasant Street is one way, headed westbound through this section right here, and then it's two-way in this section here.
Allison, did you have a question? I do, in this area. So on the property, the entrance to the garage is going to be on Pleasant, or is going to be on River?
No, it's going to be on Park Street.
Should be on Park
Right
Street.
here, we
Right
see
there.
that little gray.
So my concern, being a resident of Goat Hill, and knowing that is really that intersection of River and School, as people kind of that are going over to Salem to work, and they find their way through the neighborhoods. When you come to that intersection of River and School Street, where there's the bridge, you can, and people take a left to then take a right to go on Cox Court to get to the bridge. That's really dangerous, because you can't see if you're coming down School Street to get into Goat Hill. It's a really blind court. My concern is people that are living in this building could be working in Salem, and you're going to increase traffic from the building over to Salem, and they're going to be using those back roads more. So is there any thought of looking at that intersection? Has that been talked about with parking and traffic? It's a really blind area.
Yeah, I know exactly the intersection that you're talking about. So it was not included in our study area. We did present our study area to parking and traffic, or actually to the planning department before we moved forward with doing the study. So originally we didn't have the two intersections of Federal Street.
My concern is just
and they added those
that
in.
people could be working in Salem and using their cars to commute to work, and then putting more traffic there, and that intersection, that's also where a bus stop is. A bus stop is on School Street for the middle school, so I would be concerned about that specific intersection, especially during the times where the buses are also driving there.
Yeah, but based on the journey to work model that we put together, we weren't showing a very significant volume of traffic that would be headed down towards that way. I want to say it was somewhere in the range of like 15 to 20% of the site generated traffic that would be headed down in that general direction anyway. But yeah, certainly it's something that so the board was just to look at. Yeah, so that essentially wraps up kind of the improvements that we're looking to do and the traffic impacts associated with the project. I know Miranda did mention that we have met with the Parking and Traffic Commission during 3 separate meetings, and the Parking and Traffic Commission has issued a recommendation for the project, which included a number of conditions, mostly that were related to the transportation demand management measures that are being proposed, which I did talk about those, and then also related to the pedestrian and bicycle improvements that you see here. During our last meeting when we met with Parking and Traffic Commission, we had a very similar plan to what you see here, with the exception of this area of Pleasant Street here. They had asked us to extend the sidewalks down and provide a crossing at River Street, so that has been added at their request. And then we originally had a van stopping here at the crossing to the depot station, and they had asked us to carry this sidewalk reconstruction down to Broadway and cross Broadway with ADA accessible ramps. So we had added that as well since we last met the Parking and Traffic Commission. With that, I could open up to any questions the board may have. Please?
Sure. So kind of similar to Allison's question, I guess that overall study area, I guess I'm confused why you wouldn't include the aspect of the River and Bridge Street intersection, even though 35% of the go to work traffic runs through there. Sorry, I was just up here. I don't understand why, I guess that's why you omitted doing a intersection assessment of River and Bridge Street, as 35% of your go-to-work traffic runs through that intersection. Can you explain why that was not included in the assessment?
Yeah, really the study area that we looked at was developed with the planning department. So those were the intersections that they found to be the most of concern in terms of impacts from the project. At the time that was developed, we hadn't looked at the journey to work model yet. We can certainly, if it was desired, we could take a look at that intersection to see what it would look like. You can see, actually, can you go back to?
I just wanted to comment that anyone that live or work in that area, they understand that that's the most direct route to 128 and out of there, and so that would be kind of in addition to the obviously the family intersection down at Federal, where the four-way stop is. There's also, I think that also is tied to that same probably usage impact area, which I think would be kind of critical for me at least to have some information in that intersection as well to fully consider the project.
Yeah, this diagram here does show how much traffic we actually anticipate going through that intersection. So it's roughly 14 to 18 trips that would be headed down Bridge Street, and then also this 8 to 9 trips that would be headed up to Bridge Street. So
It's not insignificant. That's my point.
I just want to sort of supplement Rebecca's statement. And just make sure the board is aware that the determination of the areas of study is preliminarily done, obviously by the consultants, but the team has been through project review before anything was ever filed, and with the planning department. So we are happy to look into what the board determines at this point, but I just want you to understand that the study area was developed in good faith with consultation over several meetings with both project review and the planning department, and also reviewed with Department of Traffic.
this is our first opportunity.
Right.
Absolutely. I wanted to be clear that we,
Understand, this is the feedback I'm trying to provide, is that the data you're providing to me, I think in my opinion, is not complete in order to get a full assessment of the impact.
Williams?
I just wanted to take you through a few things that you talked about. First of all, in terms of your measurement, which I think was in March of this year, of the existing conditions, I think your report says, and I think you said you assumed that 110 Rantoul, that is the Holmes building, was, which I think opened sometime in the fall of 18, was fully occupied, and therefore that its contribution to traffic was already baked into existing conditions. And I mean, obviously the retail space is even not yet occupied, so that can't be totally true, but at least in terms of the residential, where did your information come from as that it was fully occupied residentially, and that so its traffic contribution was
Yeah, so it wasn't fully occupied, but the residents were mostly all constructed at the time, and a portion of them occupied, but not 100% occupied at the time. But we had assumed that would be included in the background growth rate based on the limited impact from the number of trips that would generate. And our background growth rate, we did assume a higher growth rate than what is actually experienced on the roadway. So I mentioned that the counts that we got in the surrounding
I want to
area.
interrupt you. You're answering a different question than when I asked it. It'll help if we can kind of stick to the specific question I asked, which is, your report says that you assumed that the traffic you measured in March included all of the traffic that 110 Rantoul was going to contribute current conditions, and then you built a growth rate based on what you measured as current conditions, right? So if your assumption that 110 Rantoul was fully occupied and contributing all of its traffic, if that was wrong, then everything that follows from that is wrong, at least in that respect. True?
So we did not assume that it was 100% occupied. We assumed that it was fully constructed and that it was mostly occupied at the time. For the limited number of additional units that would be occupied after that, there was very little traffic that would be generated.
None of the retail space was occupied in March in that building, and isn't occupied now. You said in your report, page 14, any additional trips generated as a result of this project, that is 110 Rantoul, have been assumed to be included in the background growth rates. But that's only true if that building is already contributing all the trips it's going to contribute. That's the only point.
So
Right?
the background growth rate is intended to estimate traffic increases as a result of smaller development projects or general population growth in the surrounding area. So we assume that whatever small amount of additional trips that would be generated by that project would be included within that.
Why do you assume that project, which is 67 residential units and a full ground floor of retail, is a small project? I mean, I don't understand that.
So, like I mentioned, most of the units were occupied at the time.
And how did you know that? How many, when you say most, how many were?
By observation of looking at, of going out, looking at the building, and in discussions with the planning staff as well. So before we did the study, we contacted the planning department to find out what other projects there were in the surrounding area and which ones we should be including within our traffic study. And we used a very conservative growth rate when we did it, so that growth rate can account for additional traffic from other development projects as well.
I have to say, I think your argument would be more credible if you, I mean, I don't think accounted for the contribution of that project. And I don't find your non-responsiveness to my questions about it to be persuasive. And I understand that this is not an exact science, but I'm just trying to understand what assumptions you made and what the basis for them were. Now, let's go to another one. So you talked about this, but I didn't quite understand the business about, you took the number of trips that you thought would be generated from the development we're talking about, and you subtracted, some people would stay on site, that is, they'd be going from the residence to the restaurant. Some people would be going off-site, but not in a car, they'd be going on a bike or on transit, I get that. Then you said some of the trips that you would subtract would be the so-called pass-by trips. And as I understood it, you said those were people that would already be driving down Rantoul Street anyway, but would come onto the property because they happened to see there was a restaurant there that they weren't planning to go to when they started their trip. And you said that would be 43% of the people arriving at the restaurant wouldn't know that's where they were going when they left their house?
No. They would know that's where they're going, but it would be people who are already coming to the area for a different purpose as well. So it would be, for example, someone's coming home from work, they're coming to taking the commuter rail into the area, and then they would go to the restaurant on site before getting in their car and leaving, or something like that.
So
or they're stopping in to purchase something in the retail as they go home. They're already coming to the area, but we still account for them. We're not just saying, oh, they're not going to drive here at all. We're still showing them driving through the study area intersections, but once you get outside of the study area, they don't show up as new trips to the area because they're already coming here for another purpose. But they will stop at the site. So they're accounted for the volume of traffic turning into the driveways and the intersections right around the site.
But not the intersection at Federal Street, for example. You say you don't have to count that person if they're going to another store and to the restaurant. You don't have to count that person because they're going somewhere else, and you assume that if there was no restaurant, they'd still be making that trip just to go to the other store. And that's 43% of the people, of 43% of what? Of which group?
That is 43% of the restaurant trips. So everyone who would be generated by the residential trips, those are people, their end destination is the residence in the end. So those are all assumed to be new trips to the area. They're not considered to be passing by. But as far as the restaurant trips, 43% of those are assumed to be passing by.
Okay. And now I want to go, so anyway, if the assumption about 43% turns out to be wrong,
it does actually work out to be less than 43% because that 43% is taken after the shared trips and the transit trips are taken out.
Right.
So it's 43% of that amount. So it
but
turns out to be closer to 30%.
right. But if it turns out you're taking away too many of those people in terms of calculating this project's contribution to the traffic problem, if you're taking away too many people based on this assumption that those people are coming down Rantoul Street anyway, then that's going to then in fact the project is contributing more to a traffic problem than your study suggests. True?
Yes, so if there's less than 43% that is passed by, there could be more new trips going through the other study area intersections than what we've shown. So we've tried to be as conservative as we can in our estimates by using 100% restaurant use, using a high turnover type of restaurant use. If a different type of restaurant use goes in here, it could generate less traffic.
And just so the last thing, I'm not trying to understand what you're saying about the difference between the traffic contribution from this project versus the traffic contribution, the traffic increase that you say is going to happen anyway, even if the project isn't built. So could you just take me through how you get that difference? I think it's in your, I'm not sure which figure.
Yeah, you're talking about how we estimate the no-build condition?
Yeah, the build versus the no-build. And how it is that even though this project is going to contribute 62 trips or what, at the AM, it doesn't make the traffic problem worse. I'm not following that.
Yeah, you can see from like this diagram here that shows kind of how those trips get distributed out through the network. When you're looking at those 62 trips and they get distributed out to each of these study area intersections, there's very few trips that actually end up at any one particular intersection.
That's not the question I'm asking though. So from your project, we're looking at what, weekday, sorry, we're looking at weekday AM 17, it's the Federal Street and Jewel intersection that I'm obviously most worried about. You're putting 17 people there on weekday AM. And what do you put in? You're saying how many of those people are going to be there even if the project doesn't get built?
So these represent all the new trips. So these would be new trips to the area.
Right. Okay, so what's the no build
what's the volume going through that intersection under no build conditions?
Are you saying 0? That's 17. That's 17 new trips.
That is new trips.
And so how is it possible that that then when you get to the build versus no build, that that's not materially affecting the performance of that intersection? That's what I don't understand. If you've got 17 more cars during that, I take it that's during an hour in the morning?
That is during 1 hour.
Okay, so you've got 17 more cars an hour, and how is it that doesn't affect the experience at that intersection?
Yes, it's really a function of the capacity of the intersection and the timing that of the signal at that intersection. Right now, the intersection is operating under capacity, which means that you can add a substantial amount of traffic to an intersection without having a huge impact to the amount of delay going through. Because each cycle has some unused green time that could be used here.
I mean, that's relative, right? It's a 43-second wait now on average in the AM, and you're saying it's going to go to 70 by 2026, 70 seconds, and only 4 seconds more even with the additional cars you're adding. That's what I don't understand how.
So, yeah, sure. So the total volume of traffic through this intersection is substantially higher than just the 17 cars here. And when we're growing it from the existing condition out to the 2026 condition, we're growing that at 0.5% per year for every single turn that's going through that intersection. So it ends up being a pretty substantial amount of traffic that we add to that intersection as a result of that just background growth.
And you're saying given that number of vehicles, 17 additional ones is not relatively not that significant.
It's pretty small in comparison to that 0.5% per year growth rate.
But again, those figures are only right if the 62 total is right, including all of the deductions you make to get from the starting point total trips down to your net vehicles. Okay, I've got you. Thank you.
Other questions? Questions, no?
So the sidewalks, I assume are all unsignalized? There's no buttons to push?
So at the intersection of Rantoul Street at Railroad Avenue, there are signalized crossings at that location. All of the other locations are unsignalized.
And is there alert lighting, those flashing things? Did you incorporate that in your-
No, there's no flashers proposed, just the typical pedestrian signs that are, you know, kind of a diamond shape with a pedestrian crossing.
I wonder if that sidewalk goes to the crossing of the road, the tracks might benefit from the alert system there. The EV charging in the garage, that's for residents?
That is,
As
yes.
far as you're aware, there's no EV in the public parking adjacent to between the park and the project?
I am not aware of any, not out on the surrounding streets.
And the EV charging, you have 2 stations proposed.
Yes,
Nice.
two charging stations, each one can charge 2 vehicles. So a total of 4 parking spaces.
And the rest of the garage, I assume, will be wired for future
For future
EV charging?
use.
That's true.
Chris, I don't know if it's the entire garage or if it's just a portion of
It's an open
it.
garage, we can add capacity, but we actually studied at the direction of the parking commission to do 100% EV charging, and National Grid will not give us that size load. They wouldn't do that. It's too big of a load for the building to assume 100% EV charging. They won't grant us that capacity today. So we have to build into it gradually through conduit
Yeah,
and upgrade.
clearly, we don't need that much yet. But 6 or 8 years from now, we may need a whole lot more. The transit use, I think you said, based on existing buildings like maybe 110 or 2, transit use was 22 to 30%? Are you right?
No, it was actually 28% transit use based on the survey that was done at the 131. transit use.
All my name.
So 28%.
That's correct.
Good for us, I guess.
And then there was additional 5% that were using bus, shuttles, or carpool services as well. So the 28% was commuter rail specific, and then an additional 5% using bus and shuttle service like CADIC.
So a third.
Yep, so roughly, total was 32% of general transit.
Good for us. Pass-by trips at 43%, which is really 30%. What's the source of that 43? Where's that number come
The 43% pass-by, that comes from the ITE Trip Generation Handbook. And that's specific to high turnover sit-down restaurants.
Okay, and so there's a lot of numbers going by, but the weekday PM level of service, I think you said at one area, it went from a D to an F?
That's on the Rantools or Street northbound approach at Federal Street.
So D to an F is pretty significant.
Yeah, and that's going from existing up to the build conditions, so that includes like a lot of that background for grade 2 that's happening there. But that intersection is based on the current signal timing that was in place when we did the study. That may have been tweaked a little bit since then as part of the MassDOT project. But based on that timing, it was reaching capacity, and that's why when you add a little bit of traffic, you get a big increase in delay when you're approaching capacity. So we had recommended that they add a few more seconds of green time to that northbound approach to get people through. The main reason that that's happening at that intersection is there's a high left turn volume going northbound, turning onto Federal Street during the PM peak hour, and there's no left turn lanes out there. And with the addition of the bike lanes and the narrowing of the travel lanes to accommodate the bump outs, now people can't bypass somebody that's trying to turn left. So that's a big part of why that increase in delay occurred.
Okay, so in many cases, the service may degrade, but the level of service grade doesn't change.
Yes, the amount of delay may increase, but without
Changing
service
the
change.
grade, the level of service. With that in mind, when we go from an F to an F, as we do in some cases, there's no G grade. So we don't know how badly this service may have degraded from F to another F.
Well, you can look at the delay.
And for that
Yeah,
purpose,
so
we look at
the delays and the queues are the two things that we look at when it goes F to F.
Thank you.
No, just one more. But based on that, you said if the intersection is already functioning with an F, you said there's a kind of an exponential impact on the delay and the queue times if it's already performing at an F. So if it's say it's a C intersection and it goes to a D, its overall impact on the traffic area is less than if it's already an F and then you add delay and add time. Queues.
And that's why some of these, where we're adding more trips, you don't see a large impact, and that's because there's a lot of excess capacity there. And at other locations, like the Federal Street intersection, where you see it's headed northbound was an 11-second increase in the delay as a result of that additional traffic.
So even as normal growth is calculated, and then even as an as-built condition, at least at that intersection, the overall impact of the traffic area will be significant based on your calculations.
It would be more significant than at some of the other locations where there's more capacity.
Rebecca, can you just flip the slide where you show the traffic study area, the intersection study?
Yes, the very first one, right there.
Can you go back again? Sorry. I thought the one that was on 4 showing the pedestrian improvements. So that intersection of Pleasant and River Street there? Top of the screen?
Yep, right up here at the top
Is
end.
that part of your traffic study? I can tell from the first slide. Is that intersection study?
That is one of the study area
It was,
intersections,
okay.
yeah.
And your improvements at that intersection will include crosswalks? Because that's a funky intersection, right? It's a 2-way stop on a 3-way intersection?
It is a little bit funky, yeah. So traffic coming down River Street here, making this left-hand turn, has a free flow movement. The traffic coming up River Street has a stop sign, and then the traffic coming down Pleasant Street as well has a stop sign. We haven't proposed any changes to that in terms of the traffic control, but we have proposed the new crosswalks in those
Did you
approaches.
study the crashes at that intersection?
We did, so that was included in the crash study. Surprisingly, there's actually only 3 crashes that happened there over the 5-year study period, and it was lower than the statewide and district-wide average.
And just to follow up and echo Zane and Allison, certainly to the extent we can expand the study area to include those intersections we talked about earlier, Bridge and McPherson and River School, I think that would be helpful for us. But I seem to, now that you know where your trips are going, I think that would be helpful because those are pretty funky intersections too. And then just my last question, when you talked a little bit about the transit trips and your data in part came from survey at one of the other properties, did you say it was 131?
131, which is right across the street. This one on the other side of National Street.
Chris might know this, are we looking at a similar demographic, are you looking at similar rents to the proposed project as compared to the survey project?
Largely similar.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Miranda, were you going to? Okay. Were you going to deal with, talk about parking?
Yes, we can talk about parking. can talk about parking in an abbreviated fashion. As you know, we are applying for a special permit for parking for sort of for a unique reason. This site is actually bisected by the Depot Parking Overlay District, which is distinct from the underlying parking in the usual CC zoning district, because within the Depot overlay, the parking requirement is reduced to 1 space per unit for all units up to 2 bedrooms, whereas in the CC zoning district, 2-bedroom units would require 1 parking space per bedroom. As the project was proposed to you last, with the 111 units, our special permit relief turned out to be we needed relief because we had 3 fewer parking spaces than we required based on the location of the 2-bedroom units within the project. As I stand here tonight, and as I said in the beginning, because of the change of Casa de Luca, I don't know where the 2 bedrooms, we don't even know what the final 2-bedroom count is. I suspect we will need the same relief or less based on the reduced unit count, but that remains to be seen. So, but that's the margin of the relief that we're asking for. We essentially apply for half of the 2 bedrooms in the project or more, and for those remaining, we have a deficit of 1 space per unit. So, as it was last time, it was in the range of 3. And I would also say that the data that I think Chris Copeland presented during one of the meetings briefly, based on a survey of the other Beverly Crossing buildings in the Rantoul Street corridor. They have surveyed those facilities for actual parking demand, and it was determined, I think we have a slide here. So obviously this is tough to read, so we can present this digitally, and Chris can actually speak to it probably better than I can, so I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you. Yeah, so we counted cars for a week starting at 8 a.m., 1 p.m., 8 p.m., and also at midnight to make sure we captured those cars that were staying overnight. Obviously, the data that we show over here, I highlighted in red. The peak utilization, the peak average of all these buildings. So we have 290 apartments, 5 properties, 315 parking spaces capacity. Our average peak is 90% utilization. And then if you look at the least utilized condition is in the middle of the day, as you'd expect, 17%. So if you look at how many dwelling units per parking space that we build, so we have 290 dwelling units, 315 parking spaces among these buildings. That's 1.09 parking spaces per unit. And if you utilize the peak at midnight where we counted average, that comes out to be, right here, it's in yellow, so peak utilization per unit, 0.97 is actually utilized. Now these are cars that we counted on the lots. So that's what the numbers are, so 0.97. And then if you take the average, it's 0.59, but that takes into account all of the time, all of the day, so I don't know how realistic that is to use, but certainly the peak condition, I think we're building to 1 per unit is right there, 0.97.
Well, but keep going. Sure. What conclusion, I mean, these, in most of these places, these are assigned spaces, right? So what conclusion, I'm just not sure I understand what conclusion you would draw about how well one space per apartment is working, since if
If they're all assigned.
yeah, I mean, it's not like somebody, I guess I'm not quite so sure I'm following.
Some people move in, they don't have a car, I guess is one way to say it. I mean, they're assigned to people, but they're not 100% assigned 100% of the time. And we have
well, but if they're 90% full at midnight, then they're 90% assigned, right?
90% utilized.
Right, but only the people that have them assigned can use them. That's what.
Well, I get, okay. Some people could be away, I guess, come and go. They ebb and flow, the average is out to 90%.
Okay.
The very peak time was at Enterprise, 96%, 45 units. That was 96% utilized at midnight.
And how many nights did you do it? I mean, how many days?
We counted per week, so the data is on the
Okay.
So it just gets more detailed from here, but so we counted, Tuesday through Monday, 8 to midnight. And those are the cars that were on the lot.
Just right here.
Yeah.
You're talking about 90% max utilization of parking spaces across the multiple properties. You have an idea of the average occupancy. So if you're running lower occupancy, maybe that might.
On an annualized basis, 97%.
So you're usually running about 90%.
97% of units occupied, 3%, sometimes 4% vacancy. The building varies, it's about 3 or 4% vacancy.
If you're running 80%, that might account for
Sure.
some difference in the price. And then, Miranda, I have a question for you. When it comes to the site location and the various parking requirements, it's a little bit, some of it's a little bit gerrymandering going on. Are you saying that we're going to look at the location of where the 2 bedrooms are, where they fall, in which zoning district, and then determine what type of parking would be required by that zoning district, and then that will then result in what type of special permit you may or may not need? Is that right?
Well, the type of special permit is the same. We're trying to express to the board how much relief is needed. The only way I think of to do it was to, and let me back up, and I know we touched on this many meetings ago, but just to remind the board, the reason that the line got drawn through the half of this lot is that at the time that zoning change was done, and remember the purpose was to acknowledge the benefits of reduced parking requirements near transit-oriented development. The way that the planning department and I guess the committee that came up with this zoning change thought about it was to say all lots on Rantoul Street within X and Y are within this district. At the time, the press box building at 9 Park Street, and as well as the rear lot to the old Weaver Glass, which is now Enterprise, they were all in separate ownership. And so those didn't, even though everybody, I think, thought of it as being one development parcel because it had been considered that way, the lines were actually different. So when you go back to apply the zoning, it doesn't technically work. And the irony is that the 2 lots that are actually the closest in the entire district to the depot are not in the district. So, yes, in trying, is it sort of an arbitrary line that's drawn through the lot? In some ways, yes. I can tell you, we didn't, that the design and development did not locate their 2 bedrooms based on this line, but in trying to express to the board how much relief we need, I think that was a reasonable way to do it, because the portions of the building that were in the district don't require relief. The portions of the building that contain 2 bedrooms that are outside of the district did need relief. And that, as I said, the most recent iteration before this change, that resulted in a net difference of 3 parking spaces.
So, thank you, that's a detailed response. I guess my next question would be then, you're not asking for us to apply one of the zoning districts to the entire property, but you're willing to accept the existence of that line. You know, one of the zoning districts wouldn't need a special permit in, right?
That's one, yes, that's it.
Right.
That's,
So if
you
we
can
were
think
to
about
say
it that way.
You know what, 80% of this property is in this district, maybe the whole project should come under that district, or vice versa. You're not asking for us to do that. You're just looking to say, assuming this line is where it is, and we divide the project up, that's where we'll come up with our figure for the relief sought.
I think the result gets you to the same place, but yeah, you can characterize it that way for sure.
And all that being said, we may need none.
I think we'll see. We may need none.
Derek?
That was just to, now it's not working now, that was just to wake everyone up, because these are scintillating numbers. Actually, this is very fascinating. So question, this study that you did here, and this is of the assigned parking in your other buildings, is that correct?
It's every parking space on Rantoul Street that we have.
It's every parking space, and those are assigned spots?
They're not assigned at Broadway, 50 Broadway. I believe they're assigned and numbered everywhere else, yes.
Okay, and so each one of these residents has one parking place?
If they need it.
If they need it. What if they need 2 parking places?
Well, so at Link 480, we have some extra capacity down at Link 480.
Yeah.
And that's utilized, but what if, well, they
So
don't have to tell us they have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 cars. They don't have to tell us
Yeah,
that.
they don't. They don't. So
That's true anyway.
you're saying, okay, here it is, we're looking at all the full spaces at these different times, and that's a good study, and I'm
Yeah.
very glad that you did
Sure.
that. However, you don't know whether there are residents who have 2 or 3 cars and are parking on the city street or someplace else. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's my point.
I think in my building you do know that, because you ask that question sometimes. At 1:30.
We ask, yeah, but there could be, I suppose someone could have a car. I don't know. I think we can ask.
Yeah.
them.
Okay, that was my,
Yeah.
that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to make a proposal. First of all, by a show of hands, how many people in the audience wish to talk only about parking and traffic this evening? Just a couple. Okay. We have been doing this project for an hour and a half, and we have a very heavy agenda. However, one of our agenda items is likely to be continued. My suggestion would be that we recess this until such time, we pick a time, maybe 9:15, 9:20, move on to the 1 Water Street. The other reason 1 Water Street is important is that Rich Benevento from Parking and Traffic is here, and he's brought an expert who was here to talk to us about levels of service, queue times, things like that. So that discussion will be applicable to both this discussion as well as the Water Street project. So it seems to me it makes a whole lot of sense to recess this for perhaps half an hour, 35 minutes, and then resume it at that point in time. Mr. Clausen, did you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Aaron Clausen, Planning Director for the City of Beverly. I just wanted to answer a question that came up about the study area for the project. The question whether or not the wide Bridge Street at River, that intersection was not included. As many board members may know, the city, working with MassDOT, is advancing plans for the Bridge Street corridor, which would include reconstruction of the intersection at Bridge and River to signalize it. So that would essentially completely change the operations of that intersection. And so this analysis would would be rendered moot by that point. So the infrastructure improvements that we are designing at this point have been programmed at the state TIP, this Transportation Improvement Program. It's a capital program for the Metropolitan Planning Organization for implementation in 2023. So that, anything through this process would be researched and improved by that project. The only thing I'd add to about the parking analysis, the city has over the years conducted an analysis on parking demand for a number of multifamilies on Ringgold Street, and that survey took into account something like 600 residential units, including some Beverly Crossing properties and others, some smaller projects as well. Looking at excise taxes, cars that are registered to particular units and addresses, and found very similar parking numbers. We found, I think, in 2017, we had like 0.92 cars per dwelling unit for all that study area. Going back to 2014, it was even less. So you do see some changes over time. But that runs consistent with the analysis that Beverly Crossing has done on their own properties, and just another way of getting at that data. And then the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is the regional planning agency for Boston metro area, for which we are a member, they have been conducting the parking counts throughout the region for multifamilies, and have been finding much the same kind of data, that under one car per dwelling unit is the utilization for multifamilies. I think what's interesting about their study is that they're counting not just multifamilies near transit, but they're counting any multifamily. So they're finding that same kind of analysis that's an outcome for any multifamily, whether or not it's within a walking distance or a biking distance to transit. So it's pretty consistent with what we're finding in Beverly and in the region.
Thank you very much. Okay, so is the applicant willing to hang on till about 9:30 and come back, and then we'll deal with the members of the public who wish to speak at that point in time? We're going to try 9:30, I think. Can we have a motion to continue this public hearing to recess and resume at 9:30? Moved by Mr. Miller, seconded by Ms. Kilcoyne, sorry, Allison. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Right now, let's deal with, just very quickly, because it's a mere continuance, let's deal with number 4, which is public hearing site plan review number 146-19, 0 Everett Street LLC, care of Alexander and Femina.
I'd like to reserve the reading of the public hearing for the next meeting, but the applicant has requested a continuance until the board's next meeting, which is December 17th. And that's what I have.
Could I have a motion, please, to continue that public hearing until December 17th? Seconded by Derek. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. So if you are here for 0 Everett Street LLC, that is being continued until December 17th, 2019. Okay, the next agenda item is, we're back to number 3. Continue public hearing, site plan review -143-19 and special permit 173-19, construct a 3-story restaurant containing ground floor amenities, including restrooms, snack bar, small commercial space for water-related retail or recreational use on land owned by the City of Beverly. Property address is 1 Water Street. The applicant is Beverly Restaurant Associates, LLC. Ms. Gooding, before you and your team do continue on with your presentation, I believe that the mayor wants to introduce a gentleman who wants to speak to the board tonight about levels of service, queuing, things like that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike Cahill, your mayor, thanks for making a little bit of time for this. Over the last few months... No good? Okay, so over the last few months and listening in on these meetings, it's become clear that from time to time, the term level of service becomes pretty central to people's understanding of a project and what may or may not be impacting it. And it's really hard to know what level of service is and what it isn't. So I asked the chair if we could bring a gentleman up to try to give you a primer, kind of a 101 for the board and for the public, about kind of what you need to know, what level that we need to understand it at in order to really make thoughtful decisions. And as you know, we've been doing a lot of work to try to improve traffic conditions all over the city. And every time that we address an intersection, the goals are to make it safer for drivers, for pedestrians, for bikers, and to improve the flow of traffic. And so if you think of the two roundabouts over by Brimble Ave and Sawyer Road, if you think of the roundabout in Centerville, the 3 intersection project, Mr. Clausen said that we're trying to get a Bridge Street corridor project funded by the state, as well as a new signalization at Bridge and River. Well, that's coming in a couple of years. First, we've got this 3 intersection project, which some of you have heard me talk about many times, but will be funded for construction next summer, which will be about a 1.5-year process to rebuild the Henry's intersection, to signalize for the first time the intersection at the driveway to the Golf and Tennis Club, and to rebuild the intersection at the foot of the Veterans Memorial Bridge. Some still call it the Beverly Salem Bridge. So my point in mentioning that is I've learned about level of service over and over, and you got to keep hearing it to have it really take. Now, Alan Cloutier is a professional engineer and a professional traffic operations engineer. He works with World Tech. You know Rich Benevento, our volunteer parking and traffic chair, principal at World Tech. And so Alan's going to try to give you that quick 101 on level of service. Hopefully it'll be helpful. Thank you.
Good evening, and as a little background, I have been involved with the 3 intersection project, although we're not going to be showing anything on those tonight. So I guess just to kind of jump right into level service, I feel like some of what was discussed about over the last hour or so is kind of almost, stepped on a little bit of what I was going to talk about. So when we do traffic analysis or capacity analysis, we give quite a bit of information. We actually usually report 4 different types of information that are usually included in tables. They're a little tough to put into a graphic, which is where we usually show the level service A through F to try to simplify it, but it gets a little more complicated than that. So the 4 items that we usually talk about is the volume to capacity. Are we over capacity? And that usually is only helpful if we're near capacity. Otherwise, you're not really, as a driver, you don't know if an intersection you went through was at 0.6 or 0.8. You wouldn't know. Doesn't really give you much good information. Unless you're over capacity, that's a good thing to know if you are. We usually also identify what's queues, what's the expected queues. That's how long is traffic, how far is it going to back up. So that's something that the drivers see. That could be important if you're backing up, from one intersection through another one. But what's most important is the delay. Delay is, there was some discussion about that earlier, because that's really what drivers experience. That's how long is it going to take you to get through this intersection. You're trying to get home, trying to get to work. That's what impacts people, that's what people feel. And then comes to level of service. So level of service, which is a graded A through F, kind of like a report card, a little different. Well, there's a number of differences, so it's not perfectly like a report card in that, you might not be okay if your kid came home with a C, but where a C is usually fine for level of service. Also, we have an E, which doesn't really reflect in a report card. But that is really just kind of we're putting things into categories. So if you're at a signal, delay of 0 through 10 is an A, 10 through 20 is a B, 20 through 35 is a C, and then over 80 is an F. Now, one reason why I'm saying delay is more important is because sometimes it gets a little complicated. In that I've worked on a project before where we've added a half a second, to an intersection, and it just so happened to be that little trigger where it just went over. Instead it went from 34.9 to 35.2 well, that's 0.3 seconds, but it just happened to drop it from, let's see, that would be from a C to a D. Almost no change, but, you see that letter drop. Or, you could have, level service D is anywhere from 35 to 55 seconds. You wouldn't want, well, you could report something that said there was no change, but, you could have a 15-second delay difference. That's significant. So it's more important to look at delay. That's going to tell you a lot more. Now, at level service A, B, maybe C, yeah, that's fine. You don't really have, that's where, you get the simplification, makes it easy. If it's A or B or probably C, you don't have to look at delay. It's operating fine. You move on. If it's something more, where you're the D, the E, the F, you really want to look at it closer. That should raise an eyebrow. It doesn't mean it's, doesn't mean you can't do something. Doesn't mean, but it means you really should start looking a little more carefully. I've had projects where I've designed at level service F, where I've had intersections of corridors where, well, the alternative was, instead of a 3-lane cross-section, have a 5-lane cross-section, and that's just not what anybody wanted. So once you start getting up to those worse levels of service or higher delays, you definitely should look a little carefully. Should you do something? Could you do something? Maybe you don't want to, because at some point you're talking about adding lanes and maybe you've got a building in the way. So I guess that's kind of my quick recap is, focus on, I guess, anything more than level service C. Focus on delay. Look at delay closer. And then also, see what you could really live with. Make sure, we're also looking at the peak hours here too. Well, not here, like I'm talking in general, right? So, you don't necessarily want something that is going to give you a whole lot of extra lanes sometimes and, be empty for, 22 hours of the day. You want to kind of, but yet if you are seeing level service E or F, you want to look at it a little closer. But you gotta be careful to not have a line in the sand, kind of. You want to look at what is the difference, how much extra delay, if you have a development project coming in, look a little closer at the delay. What does that mean? And then also, what can you do or what should you do to try to improve that, I guess. That was my quick recap. Do I have any questions or anybody want to go in a little bit more detail?
Are there any questions, Mr. Cloutier? Mr. Cloutier, I'm sorry.
You might just want to mention that sometimes we are willing to accept a lower level of service for things like adding bike lanes. And I'm sure there's other reasons why we might be willing to make that trade.
Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes you want something that everybody can live with too. You might be adding lanes, adding bike lanes. So that might, be one reason why, usually, you might even have a road diet where you might take away a vehicle lane to add bike lanes. It also might, to improve pedestrian, you want to be, as a pedestrian, you want to be safe crossing the street. That example I mentioned before where, to not have a level service F would have been a 5-lane cross-section. They wanted a livable area. As a pedestrian, you don't want to cross 5 lanes of traffic. So sometimes pedestrians, bicyclists, and safety sometimes are kind of contradictory to capacity. So, really, the level service measures capacity. It doesn't, safety sometimes are related, sometimes it's completely opposite because adding lanes isn't always something we want to do or even something that sometimes we can do when you start having, constrained areas where you got buildings close to the back of the sidewalk. So, if we were in Wyoming, we'd be able to get, everything level service A or B, we'd have plenty of room, right? And probably not a whole lot of vehicles. But, if you're talking in more urban areas, sometimes, level service E, sometimes even F might be acceptable. Obviously, you need to take a closer look when you're at that types of levels of service because you want to make sure that it, when I say everybody can live with it, crossing the street, but also you don't want extremely bad congestion where, just it's difficult to get where you need to go.
Good evening. Rich Benevento, the Chairman of the Parking and Traffic Commission.
this discussion about level of service, as Alan said, is rather complex. At Parking and Traffic, we don't just look at delay. We don't just look at the no build, the existing condition. We have to look at all of that. You may have, and I saw it tonight in the first presentation, where level of service was degrading just over regional background growth. So oftentimes, if we do nothing, level of service may get worse. But you can't just look at that. You have to look at all of these things in terms of delay, in terms of queue length, in terms of what Alan was saying, what can we live with? I understand that there's been an issue about, well, geez, how do we live with a level of service E? Oh my goodness, how are we going to live with a level of service E? Oftentimes in a dense urban setting, that's what we have. That's what we have to live with. As Alan mentioned, we often design for a level of service F, a better F. We have F now, we're going to try and get a better F. Those are the kind of things that we have to look at. There's no panacea. We live in dense urban settings. We have background growth that's affecting traffic, delay, queue length, level of service, all of these things. Alan also mentioned V over C ratio, the volume to capacity ratio. As soon as you are approaching 1, actually when we're approaching like 80%, we start thinking about, geez, where is this going to go in terms of delay? Where is this going to go in terms of level of service? Some of these things in a dense urban setting, you have to do the best you can with what you have. We're not going to knock down buildings. We don't have more land to work with. It's what we have to work with. And now, because the city of Beverly has an adopted complete streets policy, we have to the greatest extent practical, address all of the items that are in complete streets, which is not just vehicles. It's vehicles, it's pedestrians, it's bicycles, it's transit. All those things are now in the same bag that we have to work with. So if you look at some of the project that Mass DOT is doing outside of Beverly, out in the Commonwealth, oftentimes we are sacrificing some level of service because now we want to accommodate cyclists, or we want to accommodate pedestrians, or we want to put in shared use paths and things of that nature. So to get hung up on, geez, this is a level of service E, how are we going to live with that, is not really a valid argument in terms of trying to correct all of these things, because you're never going to correct them all. We could do nothing, as I said. We could have no more development projects in Beverly. Zero. Tonight, planning board says, moratorium, we're not building anything else. Level of service is going to degrade just because of background growth, a good economy, people are going to a restaurant, people are going shopping. It's just the way it is. So we, at Parking and Traffic, we make the best judgments that we can and make recommendations to all of you based on our professional opinion. I've been in this business 40 years. Alan's a professional traffic operations engineer, although he's not on Parking and Traffic. But we are represented by Public Services, Planning, Police Department, Fire Department, Chamber of Commerce. We have a pretty broad range of expertise on P&T. And not that I want to bring the developers in here, but we grill them pretty extensively. So just, I don't know if that gives you any comfort level, any better comfort level, but when we're making a recommendation, it's been well thought out.
Thank you, and let me speak for the board when I say that we appreciate all of the work that you and your colleagues on Parking and Traffic put in. You are the experts, we are not. We try to ask the best questions, but push comes to shove, Mr. Benevento, we're relying upon you and your traffic commission. So thank you very much for your service and expertise.
I guess I kind of had one little extra thing to add. I guess kind of a story. Many years ago, I was working on a project in Wellesley, and they used to have a requirement that was part of a private development. You could not have an intersection drop below, degrade a level of service level, after C or whatever. And so there was a project we were working on. Actually, I was peer reviewing it. I wasn't even working on it, where we had these side streets. If you have a side street and you are trying to take a left and it's a busy main road, it can take a while sometimes to take a left turn out, even if there's not many cars coming out of that side street. Where we had this, 5 people coming out of the side street. Just so happened to be that there was enough extra volume, the delay dropped, went down a few seconds, and a level of service dropped. Under the rules, they would have had to improve it. It was not enough for a signal, because it's a tiny little side street. What are you going to do? So they were actually in a little trouble. in that it really wasn't much of an impact, but because the rules were set up very, you know, a line in the sand, they ended up changing them to kind of allow more discretion for the board. So that's where, you know, another example, especially with unsignalized, a side street, sometimes, you know, if you got a busy road, it doesn't take too many of you taking a left, it's tough to get a gap. So just mentioning more of that, it is a little complicated sometimes.
Are there any further questions for either gentleman? Thank you both very much.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Miranda Gooding from Glovsky and Glovsky.
Miranda Gooding from Glovsky and Glovsky on behalf of Beverly Restaurant Associates. Marty Bloom here is the principal, as you recall from previous meetings, along with Scott Cameron from the Marin Cameron Group, project engineers, and Rebecca and Doug from Greenman Peterson, who were introduced previously, are also the consultants on this project. And for this evening, we don't really have a formal presentation. I think to remind members of the board, when we concluded at the last meeting, we had presented our design discussion. We had done the second half of parking and traffic, and we had reviewed the special permit requests earlier, and our application certainly outlines the special permit criteria. I believe the board was ready to close the public hearing after having heard from members of the public, but for the fact that there were a couple of members that weren't able to make the meeting, I think it would have been closed at that time. So we are here. We can speak to any questions at the board's discretion, but we don't have additional information unless members of the board who were not here at the previous presentation had particular questions for us.
Through the chair. Given that, I just wanted to note that pursuant to what we refer to as the Mullen Law, Mass General Law, Chapter 39, Section 23D, board members are permitted to miss one meeting of a public hearing as long as they certify that they have reviewed the evidence from that hearing. Both Ned Barrett and Zane or Alexander Kraft were absent from this last public hearing, as you mentioned. They both certified and signed that they reviewed either the audio or the video of the subject meeting and the planning board staff reports and all the material that was distributed at that meeting. And so they're eligible to participate in this hearing and to vote on the project.
And Ms. Gooding, I agree with you. Your summary of where we were from our last meeting corresponds with my understanding of how we left things as well. I believe the mayor might have wanted to speak on this. Is Mayor Cahill available? Mr. Mayor, did you want to speak on 1 Water Street?
Before you close it.
I think we are ready to close. I will. Okay, is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak before the mayor? Okay, please form a line over there.
Madam Chairman, Dan Finn, Front Street, Beverly. Hold it. Okay, could I distribute these first, please?
Mr. Finn, do you have one for Ms. Gooding?
Madam Chairman, members of the public, Dan Finn, Front Street, Beverly, Mass. I just gave you a little handout. I just really wanted it on the record. I know it's really late, and people have been waiting a long time, and they have other hearings. But we conducted a parking count on the McDonald's site during the summer. There are over 60 counts, and you'll see on your handout that the city's counts were marked as Thursday, the 12th of September as 7, Saturday the 14th as 13, and Wednesday the 18th as 6. Those are individual counts on the McDonald's site. The rest of the counts were done by us, and there are many times over 50 cars parked on the McDonald's site. You can pretty much tell the weather by the count of cars. These are people doing recreational boating, people fishing. A lot of squid fishing was done this summer, and other people who are just going down and walking on the waterfront. So this is a little parking count. Again, it's to go on the record. The next thing in the pamphlet is an analysis of the zoning concerning parking, and I think that if you look at it closely, you'll see that the Harbor Master's lot is not, in fact, a public parking lot. It is the Harbor Master's lot, so it can't be counted, while the anchor lot can be counted even though it's full. The zoning allows you to count it even, again, though it's full. However, the Harbor Master's lot should not be counted. So that's the little analysis there. Then the third thing in the list is a site plan showing the Glover Wharf Marina, and as I've tried to explain before, the applicant doesn't have any rights to that Glover's Wharf area, and it clearly shows on, and this is taken from the project plan when that property was acquired, and that lot line does not show on the plan as I said before. The next thing is a letter written by Mary Beckman, who some people might know is unfortunately passed away, but her husband gave me permission to submit the letter, and it is exactly, even though it's 10 years old, it represents what is happening down on the waterfront and has happened, and it just represents, it's a tremendously well-written letter, which basically says that there's a lot of concerns down here, there's a lot of use for this property, and a restaurant greater than 200 seats will basically swamp us. And then the last thing is a traffic study, a parking study, excuse me, that was conducted for the Black Cow, and it is amazingly accurate in what it portrays in the area within 600 feet. We'll refer to that as the blast zone. When this restaurant goes in, there will be no on-street parking. There will be no more cookouts or picnics for the residents. There will be no more Mother's Day, because clearly you can't put 200 vehicles in our little area without it affecting our way of life. And I really want to thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone, and thank you for coming.
Hi, I just had a question. I do live in the Goat Hill area, and I don't remember the exact date, in May or June, but there was leaflets going around asking everyone to park their vehicles down in that area because there was going to be a count. I don't know if any of that is reflected in these numbers, because it was quite, people were encouraged to park their car down in that area for the entire afternoon and evening. So I just wanted to ask if you were involved in that, or if that's reflected in any of these numbers.
I was 100% involved in that. It was a Wednesday evening. It was from 4 to, actually it was supposed to take off at 6, but people got there a little earlier. So it ran basically from 6 to, say, 7. The picture was in the newspaper. Paul Layton wrote a little story. Thank you, Paul. And many of my neighbors who are here participated. And it was supposed to be a demonstration of what it would look like when the restaurant opened. It was very short, and Wednesday was picked because we know that Thursday is the day for the Jubilee sailing. We didn't pick a weekend because we knew we'd be flooded. We tried to pick a
weekday evening that would be the least impactful from a restaurant standpoint, so we could show what it would do. And I will tell you that you couldn't get more than 30 cars. My cell phone blew up with people saying, I'm driving around, I can't find a place to park. And this is what it's going to be like down there. It's Harborfest on steroids, it will be. If you've went down for Harborfest, you will know that's what it is. And I want to say to everyone, I think a restaurant would be great, just not a 350-seat restaurant. And that's so, again, thank you very much for your time.
Pete Wilworth, 10 Fawcett Terrace, Beverly. And I want to just briefly read from a letter written by then State Rep Michael Cahill. This is from May 30th, 1995, when the city was looking to purchase the 1 Water Street property and was looking for an urban self-help grant, which then Congressman Cahill nicely wrote this letter in support of. And this is from the letter. This opportunity to purchase the McDonald's site is one we cannot afford to miss. In our beautiful coastal community of 38,000, over 90% of the waterfront is privately controlled, and there is extremely limited public access for water-based recreation. Further, as a result of the new Beverly-Salem Bridge construction, one of the few public access points to the Beverly Harbor, the harbor management property, has been severely restricted. Thousands of Beverly residents stand to benefit from better public access to the Beverly Harbor waterfront. Our waterfront was once an ideal place for a leisurely stroll along the docks, to cast a fishing line, to launch a family outing, or to eat a picnic lunch while watching boats come and go. With the support of a DEM urban self-help grant, which was over $400,000, by the way, these scenes could once again be possible in Beverly. So since the mayor's here, I would ask him, maybe when he gets up to speak, to address what has changed his thinking since 1995 from a place where people can have a recreation along the waterfront to a 350-seat restaurant.
Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Jessica Berger. I live on 36 Front Street. I have a bunch of, well, not that many, but just a few points I'd like to make. I don't know if they've been made already or if there are any things that I say that I'm misunderstanding something, but if I don't get this out, I can't complain later on. So, all right, last month there was a discussion about the intersection near the proposed restaurant. I don't remember if it included the cars entering the intersection from Front Street heading towards Salem. That's very complicated there, so I'm just saying I suggest that you try doing that before making any decisions. Leaving Front Street is if you want to go to Salem. Also, the Fish Flake Hill neighborhood's over 200 years old, and the streets are narrow and one-way. Many homes are multifamily and have only one driveway or no driveway at all. Front Street is the first place drivers will attempt parking after driving down Water Street. Parking will become an enormous problem, and for me, I can't afford to lose my current or prospective tenants. About the Anchor, there was that comment about excess cars parking there, and maybe it's legal, but they do have a huge customer base, and the cars are already spilling over to the tiny municipal spot across the street. What else did I want to say? Oh, in general, as far as having the so many seats in the restaurant, to me it seems like there's a limit. You know, if you have a container, you can't just, you fit a certain amount of items in, and then you have to stop or it'll overflow. And that's what would happen with the parking lot. But if I'm stuffing a box full of things, you know, if I have extra, I can just tape it onto the outside. You can't just pull parking spaces out of thin air. So the idea of people parking all of the other areas is really definite. It would definitely happen. And also the restaurant staff. Something about using not using up spaces because of a shuttle. I don't know exactly how that would work, but I don't believe it's possible to keep employees from driving to work. Instead, they'll probably be parking on the streets to keep room for potential customers to the restaurant. If anyone else can explain that, how the shuttle would work, please, but I don't understand it. I've lived in Beverly since 2006, and I've wanted a restaurant there as much as anybody else. I'm not suggesting the entire idea of a restaurant be scrapped. I just think there's an alternative way to go about it. For instance, make the location more affordable and therefore more attractive to smaller businesses by lowering the lease and taxes for tenants, and also using the current structure. Not only it would be smaller, but also I imagine the cost would be quite a bit less. A good architect could make it look very attractive and make us forget it was ever a McDonald's. A brand new facade could be themed to blend in with the surroundings. It could look like something else entirely and even draw people to the spot. The site could be used as a cafe, a lunch spot, or a casual restaurant. Add takeout windows, and the need for parking drops even further. A casual spot would also be more affordable to a larger percentage of our residents, and that's what this whole project should be about. Unlike all the new apartment buildings and condo buildings that have been built in the past years, this is Beverly's land, as far as I understand. It's for our residents to enjoy, and it shouldn't be about increased revenue for the city. It should be about increasing the quality of life for every resident. The city's profits will go towards improving Beverly in some way. That sounds good until you realize it would be at the expense of our waterfront and historic district. And wait a minute, I have another note here. What does that say? Can't read my own writing. One sec. One other little thing. I up until 3 years ago, I lived in the Porter Mill building, which is on the Rantoul and Fayette Street. When I first moved in, it was the red brick building. And when the Enterprise rent-a-car place was torn down and they put up the new building, there was a fuss about parking and all that. But they had their own garage underneath, and we were assured there wouldn't be any problems because that's another one-way street, Fayette, and we parked on the street. But sure enough, friends coming, whatever, they didn't go and park in the garage, they parked on our street. So it became more crowded for us. And there, you can see why I moved. That's one of the reasons. And wait a second, one more thing. I feel like I'm forgetting something. I guess that's good enough. All right, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry? Sir, your name and your address, please?
Pardon?
Your name and address,
Yes,
please?
sure.
Thank you.
My name is Bill Finch. I am property owner living at 50 Front Street, where I've lived for the last 35 years. I'm concerned of two different things. One is that if its restaurant is as successful as he hopes it is, and the parking lot that goes directly to it fills up, people will then start hunting for parking spaces, and I'm concerned that that will increase the traffic on Front Street, which is a very narrow street, and all the houses, it's our historic district, most of the houses are built directly on the sidewalk. So we're very sensitive to increases in traffic. One of the things that makes that neighborhood very desirable to the people who live there is that the traffic count is low and we don't get impacted by people flying down the street except on a few occasions. So I'm concerned about seeing an increase in that. I also know that while during the day there are obviously open parking spaces because people are at work, once they come home, every available space is filled on Front Street. There's no space for people to park for the restaurant, although I'd be concerned that people coming at, say, 6 o'clock to look for a space will take spaces that will then take away the space for the person who comes home at 6:30. So I'm very concerned about that. The other thing that I'm concerned about, You're hearing a lot about level of service on the major intersections, the intersection of Water Street to Cabot Street, et cetera, et cetera. I think the biggest problem with this project from a traffic point of view is getting in and out of the restaurant onto Water Street. The sight lines there, I do this, I go to the Harbor Management Authority, and so on, for various reasons. The sight lines are extremely bad. You really can't see people making a right turn off of Cabot down onto Water when you're trying to get out of there. Likewise, when I come out of Front Street, if I want to go on Water, well, if I want to make a right turn, it's not too bad. If I want to make a left turn, it's a disaster because I can't see what's coming down Water Street. So I'm concerned about the safety of that intersection, particularly, say, at times if they're holding a wedding reception. With 100 people, the event gets out at a particular time, and suddenly we have a lot of cars trying to get out of there onto Water Street. It's a difficult intersection. And as I say, the problem is really getting from the access to the restaurant onto Water Street. So I'm concerned about that, and we really haven't heard anything about that in the traffic studies. That's it. Thank you very much. I guess I would say I would be far less concerned if we were looking at a restaurant with 200 seats as opposed to 350. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gooding, would you care to respond to any of the comments that you have heard this evening?
I would. Thank you, Madam Chair. Briefly, I think it's important, obviously with the lapse in time, to remind folks of some of the things that we've described in previous meetings to address some of these concerns. First of all, with respect to the parking, I think all of us have acknowledged that parking is a concern, but I would like to remind the board that we are actually providing the parking that is required in accordance with zoning, and so that is first and foremost something to take into account. And as a reminder, the required parking for the restaurant based on 340 seats is 86 parking spaces, and I respectfully disagree with Mr. Finn. There's no reason that we are not entitled to rely on the Harbor Master parking lot. It is a municipal parking lot that falls within the zoning as an area that can be relied on to satisfy our parking requirements. So counting the 60 proposed spaces on site as well as the 48 spaces at the Harbor Master site immediately adjacent, there are 108 spaces in total to serve 86 required spaces for this project. And as we've outlined in our application to the board as well, even if you take into account the other uses, including the Harbor Master, including the slips at the recreational and commercial marina, as well as estimated moorings at Ferryway Landing, and as well as the Harbor Master building, there is still sufficient parking in the municipal lots at 1 Water Street, at the adjacent site, 11 Water Street, and also 12 Cabot Street, the Creamery site. Those are all municipal lots, and we've accounted for not only our own use, but the other municipal uses there. Secondly, I would like to say that despite compliance with zoning, Mr. Bloom has thoroughly committed to doing whatever he can to provide as much parking as possible, including leasing parking off-site for 25 employees, and yes, and providing an employee shuttle to make sure that his employees park off-site. There will be shuttle service to and from the off-site parking to the restaurant, and stopping along the way as required by parking and traffic at the MBTA parking garage, so that there is a built-in mode of public transportation that is being provided by Mr. Bloom. He's also committed to providing a parking lot attendant to make sure that the spillover into the adjoining neighborhoods is minimized. He's not going to prevent it entirely, but he's doing what he can to do that. Finally, I wanted to say that comments regarding the intersection at Front Street, just a reminder, as I think Rebecca's report outlined, that intersection is scheduled to be redesigned, and both the traffic consultants for this project, as well as the Parking and Traffic Commission and the Planning Department, took that into account in fashioning the parking and traffic recommendation that you have. And finally, I will, and I think probably the mayor will speak to this, but you know, what I'm going to reiterate a comment from an earlier meeting with respect to the size. First of all, I think it's worth pointing out that the 340-seat restaurant is the restaurant in its absolute maximum use in, you know, the 2 prime months of the summer season. Maybe it stretches into 4 in the shoulder season, but the bulk of the year, this will be an approximately 200-seat restaurant. And I think that the proponent fashioned a project in response to an RFP issued by the city. And in addition to the requirements or the desire to have a restaurant, there were also built in many state regulatory requirements for providing public access, which have been taken account into this project, and which any proponent, Mr. Bloom or anybody else, would have to satisfy on their nickel. And respectfully, that couldn't be done in the existing McDonald's building and provide any sort of restaurant that would help support the overall infrastructure down at the waterfront. So I think given the duration of the wait for this project, the importance that it has for the city, the fact that Mr. Bloom is an experienced restaurant operator who has taken steps and has pledged to continue to take steps to make this situation work. All of those, I think, are, I would offer in response to the comments that you've just heard. And with that, turn it over to the mayor.
Thank you. And I think, I hate to be a lawyer here, but to make sure that we're following the rules, I think what we need to do is continue this public hearing to 9:32, recess and continue this hearing to 9:32, resume the Depot Square hearing, and then move to continue that to, right, that's what I mean. So why don't we move to recess this hearing to 9:35? Is there a second? Okay.
I'll need several minutes.
Okay.
No, he's not. She's restarting this one, right?
Yes. Yes. So then all we have to do is then reset the time for the Depot Square. All right. Motion recess. Second, all in favor? All opposed, motion passes. All in favor? Motion passes.
Hearing reopened, I move to recess that to 9:50. Mr. Mayor, 20 minutes? 15, 10, 5? All right, 20 minutes.
What kind of time are you going to need after that?
Yeah, so we'll say, I mean, we can always go in early, so I'll say recess till 10. Reopen the Depot Square at 10 p.m.
Motion by Mr. Barrett, seconded by Ms. Flannery. Discussion on the motion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. Okay. Mr. Mayor.
Move to reopen the public hearing on 1 Water Street.
Seconded by Ms. Kilcoyne. All in favor? Thanks. Motion passes. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, everybody, for your attention. First, to Mr. Wilworth's question, Thank you for reading my letter. I hadn't heard that in a long time. You know, the consistency is that the intention all along with going after this grant, the city going after the grant to buy the parcel, was always to kind of further activate the waterfront. Now, a couple of years ago, a judge decided that the vertical path along the Port Marine property from Water Street to the waterfront, that the judge allowed the Port Marine to discontinue that path, decided that since the city owned the one Water Street property, we didn't need that access. Well, we do. And so in the proposal here that Mr. Bloom and team have brought forward, one thing is they'll restore that vertical path along their property line from Water Street to the waterfront. Under Chapter 91, we already have along the waterfront property, and we've got the enjoyment of that. This adds an additional way to get to it. In addition, the project also calls for all the parking on site to be available to anyone. And so that's, you know, that's a part of the enjoyment of the waterfront, is the ability to go down there and park and walk around. And the restaurant, the intention always has been that the ability for people to get a takeout and go sit out on a bench or sit at a table at a bench or walk along the waterfront is a part of that, that enjoyment of the space. So it all really squares up. It's been part of the plan all along. When the city applied for the grant, gosh, it's, as you said, 1995, so it's well over 20 years. It was an urban self-help grant through the Department of Environmental Management, as you said, and it made up a part of the purchase price. There was city money along with that self-help grant money that bought the parcel. In the application, it said, we want a restaurant on the site. Then there was a project agreement signed after that between the city and the state that said, we want a restaurant on the site. Since then, there have been two further project agreements, one that was signed in concert with the Black Cow proposal, and then one that where's Aaron? Our planning director, our solicitor's office, and I, we worked for some time with the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs to add a third project agreement that really articulated just how the public use and enjoyment of the property could be met by anybody who would respond to our RFP. So this is, you know, this has been a nearly a quarter century journey. There have been 4 RFPs, 2 under the Scalen administration, and we realized when I took office 6 years ago that there were things standing in the way of the project being possible. So we went to the state after I was elected, and we filed application to remove the designated port area designation from our harbor front, which was part of a state law passed in 1978 that was meant to protect working waterfronts. Well, if you know the history back far enough, Beverly had a coal pile, Beverly had a refinery, Beverly had, in addition to commercial fishing, Beverly had those other things that had gone away and weren't coming back. And so the state agreed that it didn't make sense to keep the DPA on our harbor front and removed it. We thought that had us in position to really go with the restaurant project, with the RFP. So we put one out, and we learned that we weren't quite there because the only respondent then, I guess that was about 4 years ago, the only respondent then was non-responsive. They didn't provide any public access on the project, so we had to reject that, which had us come to better understand that the way to provide, the ways in which public access could be provided was really the kind of the crux of how to make the project work. And so it was that further amended project agreement with Environmental Affairs that laid out just how somebody responding to an RFP could handle the public piece of it. We then spent time working with several highly capable restaurateurs, restaurant groups, and what we found was that every single one of them was telling us the same thing, that the project had to be a certain size in order to work. Now, with the public access and enjoyment requirements, whoever's building this needs to build space for the public. it needs to be a 3-story restaurant as opposed to a 2-story because so much of the first floor really is given over to the public use and enjoyment. And that adds cost. And so the other restaurateurs who looked hard at this and didn't go through and respond to an RFP, they were saying the same thing about the kind of general scale of the project. Mr. Bloom and his team have come in and have responded in that way, and you see, what the proposal is in front of the planning board, and it's consistent with everything that we've been learning over time. So with all that said, it's really that there's a great proposal in front of you. It will further activate the waterfront. It will bring a lot of people to the waterfront, more than are there, and that's been part of the goal all along. We have a great partner in Mr. Bloom. I mean, I'm standing here because this is as much a city project as it is a proposal of Mr. Bloom's. It's been really the charge and the direction of the community for a long, long time to bring this activity to this space. So here we are, and I think an issue that's been raised that we're all paying a lot of attention to is parking. Other issues have been raised that I don't think really square. I don't think they hold up. Parking does. Parking is our challenge. I've been telling Mr. Bloom for a year or more, parking is it. We've got to do everything we possibly can to address parking. It's been suggested that traffic is an issue here. I'll tell you that while I appreciate the concerns and I understand them, I don't believe traffic is going to be an issue here because we are rebuilding the intersection, and the simple fact is that traffic signalization technology is light years today beyond where it was 25 years ago when this intersection was built. So the ability, the smart technology that's in the intersection that will be built will mean that Front Street pulling out doesn't get their green light for X number of seconds, and it's the same every time through, or it's the same at a given time of day, and then Cabot southbound, it's not going to be like that. The technology in the system will read the cues, and it will adjust and time up and sequence up what's needed throughout the course of the day based on the ability of that software to do just that. And so that's where, and I think our traffic engineers were afraid of getting too technical when they talked about levels of service earlier. Fortunately, I'm a layman, so I can say it and be confused, and if it confuses you, I'm sorry. But we have a lot of confidence in what has been designed already and what we're being assured will move cars through. Will move, and the queuing time will be reasonable. And the ability to empty a direction that's queuing in a cycle will be there. So that's something we're confident in. So again, it goes back to parking. Now, I'll tell you that in everything we did in rezoning the harborfront several years ago, we paid a lot of attention to our commercial fishermen, and everything we do is designed to protect our commercial fishermen. They largely park in the harbor master's lot, and they're largely out early in the morning and back by late afternoon. The use of the harbor master's lot by the restaurant will be largely in the evening. The ability, and Ms. Gooding pointed it out, it's over 100 spaces between the One Water Street lot and the harbor master's lot. And we know that in and of itself isn't enough. I know in talking with Mr. Bloom, he's looking hard at and is willing to valet his busiest evenings so that he can stack cars and gain greater capacity in the lot, which could give significant additional yield of parking spaces. We're both, and when I say we're both, Mr. Bloom and me, but also my whole team at City Hall, we're all focused in on trying to find more parking as we go, and also trying to address the neighbors' concerns with how they're going to be able to continue to have parking in front of their homes, to the extent there are neighbors who don't have off-street parking. We know there are a good number. We're looking at what we're already doing with our downtown parking program and whether it makes sense to extend into those neighborhoods with the resident parking option and some limitations on other people's ability to park there. So we're looking at all that. The good thing is, if you approve this tonight, we've got about 1.5 years to figure this out. Because between state permitting and construction, it'll be about 1.5 years before the restaurant would open. Just to give you a couple of examples of additional parking that we've found to date, as you've heard, Mr. Bloom has struck an agreement for 25 spaces off-site for his employees, so he'll shuttle them. It's been suggested that, well, the employees might not follow that. Look, he's hiring them. He's assured me that when he hires them, he's going to tell them that they will go there and they will park there, and that's how they will get to work, unless they're being dropped off by, a friend or relative or a rideshare. But if they're driving, they'll be driving to the off-site, off-street parking that he has leased. The van that he's buying to shuttle them will be used to help shuttle patrons as well. And I've mentioned this to some of you, but to just say it publicly, the city is working with the MBTA to identify 16 or more spaces on an MBTA right-of-way. If you're coming out of Goat Hill and you cross the tracks and Rowan's is on your right, just across the tracks, along the tracks on the left, there's an MBTA right-of-way that our engineers have identified that we could add 16 or more spaces, and we've been working with the real estate office at the MBTA, and they've given very positive indication that they'll be able to work out a lease with us to do that. So we're working through that process and are very hopeful. And so that's the point on parking. Just know that it's everything to us. To me, to the neighbors who are concerned, it's everything to me to help you figure it out so that you're not negatively impacted, and that this restaurant can be a great success and the neighborhood can survive it, abide by it, enjoy it, support it, and that's really our goal that we'll be working at every day from now till the restaurant opens and beyond. I think that's probably it, except to say, I as a rule, as mayor, I don't ask any of you individually for support of a given project. I don't feel that's right or ethical. I've said to you, I've said to others that if I'm going to ask for something, I'll come here, like any member of the public, and let people know where it is I stand. And on this issue, I feel very strongly that what's in front of you is in the best interest of the community, and the concerns that are being raised, we're listening hard to, we're working hard to address, and we'll continue to do so. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Darlene, Mr. Finn's package will become part of the record of this case. Do we have other letters that will become part?
Yes, do you want me to just summarize all the letters we've received? So we have letters from, which have already been entered into the record in prior meetings. So I'll just date them. September 9th from the Beverly Fire Department, October 7th, 2019 from the Design Review Board with a recommendation and conditions. Trying to go in order. September 30th, 2019 from the Engineering Department. I would, given the nature of the letter and how it's not structured in an easy way, I would recommend that if the board were to approve it, they would just incorporate the letter and any conditions or comments that are there within, because it's not numbered. And October 18th, 2019 from the Parking and Traffic Commission has been discussed. That letter also has a number of conditions. Let's see, four conditions for the board to consider. And finally, the letter that we received this week, November 18th, 2019, from the city solicitor, Stephanie Williams, which you all received. I won't speak for her, but just ultimately the final point was that your consideration of the above referenced applications does not involve addressing and or resolving any claims made regarding the deed or Article 97. I think that was just at the board's request to clarify what is in the purview of the board for consideration and what is not. Any other public comment letters that we've received throughout the time are also incorporated.
Sir, did you want to speak on Depot, or are you looking to speak on 1 Water Street?
My name is Bob Minton. I live at 10 Goodyear Street. Actually, I wanted to speak on the Depot, but while I was sitting here, one thing struck me is I go to the waterfront as a resident, not in a butter, many times a week. I park under the bridge and I walk the waterfront. Sometimes I go to Beach Park, sometimes I walk back. My question is, when they said there will be an attendant, parking attendant, how is that going to work for me who, if I go down the waterfront and obviously the Harbor Master lot is full because people are in the restaurant, can I park in their lot with their attendant there? Is he going to tell me, you can't park here? So I'm losing my spot. I just would like that answered. How is that parking attendant going to work?
Miranda, can you answer that, please?
So just to clarify, as the mayor said, all of the spaces at 1 Water Street and the adjoining Harbor Master lot are public, open to the public spaces. The parking attendant is there to sort of alert people before they pull in that the lot is full and to mark it so that we don't have some of the concerns that were addressed by residents on Front Street.
Thank you very much. Are there any final questions from members of the board? No questions. I'd welcome a motion to close this public hearing. Motion by Ms. Flannery. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Besh. Discussion on the motion. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. Let's deal with this right now if we can. The applicant seeks 4 things, 3 of which are special permits. First special permit is under section 300-45C5 of the zoning ordinance to authorize a restaurant with approximately 17,500 square feet in gross area in the BHD zoning district. Second special permit under section 300-45I1B is to grant a bonus in the floor area ratio to increase the maximum floor area ratio from 0.25 to 0.42 in consideration of constructing a public pedestrian walkway along the project shoreline, having a minimum width of 10 feet. And finally, the third special permit under section 300-45G4B is to allow the longer side of the proposed building to face the harbor side of the property in order to provide maximum waterfront views from the restaurant and to encourage the building's interaction with the waterfront. So 3 special permits and then site plan approval under section 300-98A of the zoning ordinance. And my suggestion would be that we deal with the special permits first and perhaps do them one at a time.
Madam Chair? Yes. Excuse me. I'd just like to clarify one thing. I realized as you were reading the special permit for the FAR ratio, there's actually a typo in the request. We are providing a public walkway of 15 feet, which is required under the ordinance. It's shown on the plan. So,
so your application says 10, it should say 15.
it should say 15, which we are providing.
Thank you.
All right, so I guess we'll take them one at a time. I'll get the ball rolling with respect to the special permits. With respect to special permit requested by the applicant for 1 Water Street, the special permit under section 300-45C5 of the zoning ordinance to authorize a restaurant with approximately 17,500 square feet in gross floor area in the BHD zoning district. I would move that this board approve that special permit. Fine. With respect to the special permit findings, the approval would be on the basis of finding that the specific site is an appropriate location for the proposed use, that the character of the adjoining uses will not be adversely affected, that no factual evidence is found that property values in the district will be adversely affected by such use, that no undue traffic and no nuisance or unreasonable hazard will result, that adequate and appropriate facilities will be provided for the proper operation and maintenance of the proposed use, that there are no valid objections from abutting property owners based on demonstrable fact, and that adequate and appropriate city services are or will be available for the proposed use.
There's a motion by Mr. Barrett. Is there a second on the motion? Seconded by Mr. Besh. Discussion on the motion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. Special permit granted.
With respect to special permit under section 300-45I1B to grant a bonus in floor area ratio, known as FAR, to increase the maximum FAR from 0.25 to 0.42 in consideration of constructing a public pedestrian walkway along the project shoreline having a minimum width of 15 feet. I move that this board approve that special permit and adopt the following findings: that the specific site is an appropriate location for the proposed use, and that the character of the adjoining uses will not be adversely affected, that no factual evidence is found that the property values in the district will be adversely affected by such use, that no undue traffic and no nuisance or unreasonable hazard will result, that adequate and appropriate facilities will be provided for the proper operation and maintenance of the proposed use, that there are no valid objections from abutting property owners based on demonstrable fact, and that adequate and appropriate city services are or will be available for the proposed use.
There's a motion by Mr. Barrett. Is there a second on the motion? Second by Ms. Flannery. Discussion on the motion?
As long as we do it once?
Yes, yes, yeah. I don't think you need to read them again.
Okay. Okay.
It'll be written all at once.
Okay, all right, so I'll do it at the end.
Further discussion on the motion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes.
With respect to the applicant's request for a special permit under section 300-45G4B to allow the longer side of the proposed building to face the harbor side of the property in order to provide maximum waterfront views from the restaurant and encourage the building's interaction with the waterfront, I would move that this board allow that motion, adopting the following findings and contingent upon the to be enumerated conditions. With respect to findings, I propose that the board adopt the following findings: that the specific site is an appropriate location for the proposed use, and that the character of the adjoining uses will not be adversely affected. That no factual evidence is found that the property values in the district will be adversely affected by such use. That no undue traffic and no nuisance or unreasonable hazard will result. That adequate and appropriate facilities will be provided for the proper operation and maintenance of the proposed use. That there are no valid objections from abutting property owners based on demonstrable fact, and that adequate and appropriate city services are or will be available for the proposed use. I move that the approval of this special permit be contingent upon the, or strike that, I just move that the issuance of the special permit approval incorporate all conditions and comments from the letters received by this board from the various boards and committees, including the 9/9/19 letter from the fire department, the 10/7/19 letter from the design review board, the 9/30/19 letter from the engineering department, and the 10/18/19 letter from Parking and Traffic Commission.
There's a motion by Mr. Barrett. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Besh. Discussion on the motion?
Yeah, I have a question, sorry.
Okay.
It's, the resident parking situation is what concerns me the most with this. And looking at the conditions that were stated in Parking and my lack of knowledge on it, but in terms of looking for solutions for residents who, if those areas get flooded with cars, is this condition going to study that post construction and operation to catch a problem, and will it be able to, will we or some other entity then have the ability to then do something about that? To say, yes, we need to put resident parking status in these streets, that sort of thing. I mean, this is a unique area, and these neighbors, I think, are more impacted than in any project I've seen in terms of the potential Front Street, et cetera, et cetera.
So the question has to be, is there a specific condition that's going to require post-occupancy review of traffic? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Of residential area, not just is the shuttle working, are municipal lots full, but are the neighborhoods impacted? Parking and traffic recommendation number one. Right, yeah. But I think maybe we could say that an addendum to that would be a specific to residential parking. I think that's fine. I think we could addendum to review of parking in the residential area as part of parking and traffic condition number one, and cited on page 2 of 3 of their letter. Yeah, with recommendations for mitigation, if needed. It's in here as conduct a post-development monitoring. So we want to put that. In the past, we've done a set period of time acquisitions of occupancy permit. Yeah. So, what do you think? I mean, so, I mean, Derek, what we're talking about is the fact that we have them do, it's 6 months after they open, and they open in November, and then 6 months later, it's February, that might not be useful. So maybe how would you like to word that?
6 months and a year.
What's the expected maximum? What are the 2 months, Ms. Gooding, that you mentioned for maximum use?
Yeah, the maximum use would be July and August. I do believe that the condition that's contained within the parking and traffic recommendation referred to a post-operation study during the peak operating times. Was that correct?
It's not.
Summer.
During summer peak.
So.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is in there. So you see that, Darren?
And I would just say, to the extent there's a question about including specifically the resident parking impacts, we have no objection to that. I think the Parking and Traffic Commission would want to be looking at that anyway, even though it wasn't spelled out. Obviously, making changes in resident parking systems is something that is a city council matter, actually. I believe in the consultation of the department before parking regulations can be changed on site, but we can certainly study it and present it to parking and traffic.
So then, Derek, in that day, the parking and traffic condition calls for the monitoring study conducted during the summer peak season. I would say that maybe following opening of the facility. facility with the results to be reported to the planning department, and to include a survey of residential parking areas.
The planning department and planning board. Well, so the board has a chance to see it, so that someone has a chance to see it.
May I suggest that it go to Parking and Traffic Commission, since they have jurisdiction and are already set, and then would make a recommendation to the board. Mr. Chair, do you want to speak?
So the intent of that condition, you'll see it's somewhat broad, in that they have to do a monitoring study. We were insistent that the monitoring study be done during the peak time. We don't want to do it non-peak because it's not going to be a problem. We want to see when it's going to be affecting at peak time. The monitoring study, they have to come back with a management plan, a parking management plan to us, which we will review and approve or disapprove. And if we disapprove it, they're going to have to come back with something else. And if we disapprove it again, they'll have to come back with something else. And the idea here is that it may be a variety of traffic management techniques. It may include resident parking. It may include identifying other parking areas, either adjacent or remote from the restaurant, that they will now have to either lease or find space for, and then provide service to the restaurant. We had a lot of discussion about parking, just so you know, during our meetings. But that was the intent of that condition, as opposed to saying, we're only going to look at parking on Front Street, or we're only going to look at parking on Cabot Street. We wanted to leave it broad, that if there is an issue based on experience and based on what their monitoring study shows, then they have to come up with a management plan, and it has to come to us for our review and approval, which obviously we would then send to the planning board for your information as well.
So I'm going to amend my motion to address the issue. So the motion stands as previously stated. Included in our conditions would be that the Parking and Traffic Commission's condition number 1, as noted on its 9, strike that 10/18/19 letter, that the applicant shall include in its monitoring study the impacts of parking on the residential area and report that to the Parking and Traffic Commission.
We have a motion by Mr. Barrett, we have a second by Ms. Flannery. Further discussion on the motion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes.
But there are findings.
There are not findings. You can make findings.
I get
Now, with respect to site plan review number 143-19, with respect to 1 Water Street, I would move that this plan approve the site plan for 1 Water Street to construct a 3-story restaurant containing ground floor amenities, including restrooms, etc., as noted in the applicant's application. Would reference and incorporate herein the conditions as set forth in this board's approval of the special permits requested by this applicant.
Motion by Mr. Barrett, is there a second? Second by Mr. Besh. Discussion on the motion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your work.
So I would move. Okay, I would move that we open the Depot 2 public hearing.
Motion
I would move that we recess the Depot 2 public hearing until 10:15.
Seconded by Ms. Flannery, all in favor?